He is a graduate student of opera at Northwestern University, a young man with a full scholarship. But there is one song he is refusing to sing. Lourdes Duarte is in our newsroom with the story.
Yeah, he sure is. We're talking about a 25-year-old graduate student, as you mentioned, says he's willing to do even extra credit if that's what it takes, but he just does not want to perform the work of a poet considered by many to be offensive and racist. The university threatening to fail him if he doesn't comply. The battle has led the student to make his own threats as well, promising not to drop the issue until he sees a positive resolution. Hard not to notice Timothy McNair's booming voice, a music master's student at Northwestern University who says this time his voice isn't being heard at all.
I was extremely angry, and you know, I still am.
As part of his music class, he is required to perform at a June 8th concert. He's performed plenty of times before. Here he is at a concert series in Bavaria. But this time, it is different. He would have to perform 3 songs. One of them contains the writings of this man, American poet Walt Whitman,
whom we know is one of the most historically racist poets of U.S. history, and there were all sorts of interesting things that he said, of which he's called African Americans baboons, and was for oppressing voting rights.
Although some may disagree with him, Timothy feels pretty strongly about it. He says he researched Whitman for a sociology class, and even though the Whitman poem he's being asked to perform doesn't contain any blatant racism, he's insulted by the writer and some of his other work. Here's an email Timothy says he exchanged with his music professor, Dr. Nally. His response is what he can't get over: either perform all the selections or be banned from class and receive a failing grade.
Certainly, I do not deserve to fail this class. I've made an A in this class for the past 2 quarters. I have over a 3.7 GPA. I'm an officer on 2 committees at this university. So what is deserving of the situation for me is to be able to perform 2 pieces and not the 3rd. To even have the 3rd piece removed because of the insensitivity.
But right now, it doesn't look like that will happen. The school sending out this statement, quote, Northwestern University does not comment on academic issues regarding individual students. However, the university's expectation of all students is that they complete work assigned by their professors. He is filing a complaint with the NAACP. Just today, by the way, he received another email from his professor letting him know that if he wishes to perform all of the songs, he has to return to class by tomorrow. Timothy does not plan to do so, though. We did reach out to that professor, but no comment from him tonight.
Wow.
Bill.
And all the while, I kept thinking about that great old Whitman poem. When I heard the learned astronomer.
I don't know it.
Anyway.
Well, can you recite it?
Pathetically enough, I could.
All right, well.
Oh.
No, come on. Come on.
Yeah? When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and the diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured, with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. Yes, I am a nerd.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Context of White Supremacy. Justice, Gus T Renegade, in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. High lashes. – Today's date, Monday, June 3rd, 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021. 2021 2013. So I have been told. We will be back a little later in the week. Visit the Facebook page. Visit the Twitter account. Twitter, we are at Until Justice. The Twitter account again, at Until Justice. Get the updates. I tweet when we have programs. I also tweet if I find constructive information that I think is relative to racism, white supremacy. Follow us on Twitter at Until Justice. But yeah, hit the Facebook page. You can see us here at Black Talk Radio Network when we will have some of our next broadcast. Of course, we will have our finale to the study session on Chinua Achebe and the education of a British protected child. That should be this Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Chinua Achebe, the education of a British protected child. Final study session. Short book. I said that it's only going to be 4. All done. Moving on to something else. Anywho, the broadcast for today. This just reading the news, I still see a lot of people. I used to be one of the folks who would say, the news is foolishness. I don't pay attention to any of that, and it's all hogwash. Bunkum, that was one of our words for the year. Which, yes, I completely agree. Many things that are reported as news, they are either inaccurate, they're not giving you all of the information, and or they are directly, indirectly promoting racism, white supremacy. Yes, I agree, no doubt. However, if you're not paying attention to the news, as I said before, I have a difficult time distinguishing between whether or not this is just someone who's poorly informed, or is this someone who just says, I don't pay attention to the news because that's all hogwash and phooey. I don't know. I have a hard time. At any rate, I would encourage read the news. If you are serious about studying racism, white supremacy, learning about it, studying it worldwide, I would say the newspaper is a wonderful resource. They are talking about racism all the time in the newspaper, directly and indirectly. Most recently, they were talking about it directly with our guest for today's program. Our guest, if you're on the line, go ahead and press *6. That'll make it easier for me to distinguish which line is yours. Just press *6 if you are with us on the line for our guest. But reading the newspaper, try to, on a weekly basis, really on a daily basis, but I definitely try to make an effort to go online, get the newspaper, whether I'm listening to news radio programs or whatever the case may be, really making an effort to be attentive, be paying attention to things that are happening locally, nationally, globally. And I checked the news. I know a lot of our listeners have been paying attention to the Chicago school closings. Northwestern University is in Chicago, it's right outside of Chicago. I actually toured Northwestern when I was trying to pick out schools and what have you. Been on the campus. It's lovely, beautiful campus, the whole nine. And even some of our guests have been from Northwestern. If you want to talk about memory lane, Eula Biss, Notes from No Man's Land, way back in 2009. She was on the program. Dorothy Roberts, she used to be at Northwestern. She's now at the University of Penn. But the 3 times she was with us, she was at Northwestern. And one of our most infamous visits, Cheryl Giudice, talking about quote-unquote interracial marriage. But I think we've had at least 3 or 4. Charles W. Mills also is at Northwestern. So we've had quite a few guests who are actually professors. I think this is the first time we're having a grad student visiting with us. But he is a graduate student in the music department. He made a stand. We were just talking this Saturday, the most recent program, about people not being focused, not willing to make sacrifices to end racism, recognizing racism as a problem and feeling, hey, I should be doing something about this. I'm not going to be a coward. I'm not going to be beaten down and afraid because something could happen to me or some sort of punishment could result from my actions responding to racism and trying to oppose racism when I see it happening, especially if it's happening to me. We were just talking about this, and I think this is a great illustration of someone who is operating with self-respect, someone who has an appreciation for information. And once you get more information, you can make better decisions about things that you want to do, things that maybe you shouldn't do. Will be wonderful to get more information. I'm so thankful we could have him on the program this evening to give some more of his lofty credentials. Our guest for this evening, he is pursuing a Master of Music degree at Northwestern University, Northwestern University's Bienen School of Music. He is the full Eckstein Scholarship recipient, Master of Music, Voice, and Opera for the class of 2014. We will get into the details of what racism he has encountered at Northwestern, how he's responded to it, and what he hopes will be the result of all this. So thankful to have him on the program with us this Monday evening. Our guest joining us live from Illinois, Mr. Timothy McNair. Mr. McNair, are you with us?
I am. How are you doing today?
Right poorly, but I am so thankful you could share some of your time with us. I'm really excited to share what has happened to you and what you're doing about things. I'm so thankful to share your experience with our listeners. So thanks for sharing some time with us.
Thank you for having me.
For sure. For our listeners, I guess if we could start off, anything you would like to share with listeners, anything you think would be significant or anything you think listeners should know about you before we proceed?
Well, as you mentioned, I'll just briefly go through that. And everything that you said, of course, is correct. I am finishing up my first year as a Master of Music candidate in Voice and Opera at Northwestern University's Bienen School of Music, where I received and accepted the Eckstein Endowment, which is their most prestigious full scholarship at the Bienen School of Music. And so I'm finishing up the spring quarter as we speak, actually. This is our last week of classes because we're in quarters, and next week is finals. And so I'm originally from North Carolina, and here I am.
Wow, okay. Originally from North Carolina. Mr. Scotty Reed, Black Talk Radio Network, founded in North Carolina. For listeners who haven't seen the video or some of the other reports about your situation, you are a black male, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. This program, Context of White Supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded what is producing the Walt Whitmans of the world, 19th century, 21st century versions, as well as your incident, which we'll get more into detail about as we go on. But what's producing all of this is the system of racism, white supremacy. I use the two terms, racism and white supremacy, as synonyms, and I use the same definition for both terms. The definition I use is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think that such a system exists, and do you think that's an accurate definition?
That is an accurate definition.
Wow, succinct like that. Okay. Before we get into detail, that should stand out for listeners. Most folks have a few more words. Very rare that we get someone who just, yep, that's accurate. Before we get to what happened specifically in the graduate program at Northwestern, I'd like to kind of start out just something I ask a lot of our guests. Did your parents, when you were growing up in North Carolina, did they talk to you about racism? What was your understanding of racism as you were growing up?
Well, of course, I grew up in the South, and my undergraduate took place in the Deep South in Louisiana. So the things that I saw, of course, people have stereotypes of fear of what I did growing up. Some of them think that I jumped across, haystacks. That was only on weekends. So growing up, in terms of being told about racism, educated on racism, there was the typical, what I'd say, for instance, if you see in, Who's Black in America, they do a full series on African-American young men being advised on what to do by their parents. So my mother, who was a single-parent mother, did teach me certain things. You know, I went to school and I was at a predominantly white high school in the rural South. We were a very humble, modest to lower middle class, working class standards, and I went to school at a 90% white high school, and I was definitely in the minority. And there were a lot of people who identified themselves proudly as rednecks. So the experience of racism I endured myself, but I was prepared. My mother tried to prepare me as well as she could. Of course, there was never really a preparation for it in this world. But, you know, there were things that she told me growing up from the age of 5, I remember vividly, from people growing up in my church to family saying, "You are a young black man. You are a young black man." And for a while, I did not understand what they were saying. I thought, why do they keep telling me I'm a young black man? Yeah. But as I got older, what they were saying is, you are a young black man. Your threshold of error is much smaller to a degree than that of a white man, or any other man for that matter, quite frankly, in this country. And I learned from that sadly the odds were historically institutionally stacked against me. And that if there was a hole to fall in, it was going to make itself a black hole, a swallowing up hole, if I put one foot or peered inside of it. And that was really at the helm of what I was taught as a child, was to always be prepared, to always try to look good on paper if I could, for things that could not be refuted, to make sure that they were in my favor, to make sure that I never set myself up so someone could have the proof to say, oh yeah, he is lazy, because they were going to call me lazy regardless if I made honor roll, regardless if I was in AP class and graduated top of my class. They were going to call me lazy, they were going to call me stupid. But to make sure that on that paper that we could say, well, what they're saying and what's on paper doesn't line up, which is blood open to my life now. And that was at the core of truly how I was raised as a child, and of course not reaching really quickly into the glove compartment in the South. And that was what my mother taught me.
Wow, that is fascinating. I guess one of many things that I picked out of there, you said your high school in North Carolina was 90% white. Is that accurate?
Very much so.
Ooh. How big was your high school, like population of students?
So my graduating class was around 480, and each year kept getting bigger. So you're looking at easily over 2,000 students.
Wow! Oh my Lord, that is.
And it was rural South. You know, you're talking. I grew up in a small town. I was born in Chapel Hill, and my hometown's there now because that's where I live with my family. But I was raised in a small mill town outside of Chapel Hill, North a town of about 1,000 people called Haw River, and it's in Alamance County. And actually, the school that I went to was used to be the all-white male high school in that county, and it was called the Sons of the Confederacy. And actually, where we would have picnics, if you did an aerial view from an airplane down, you could see where they tried to cover it with stone tables and benches. But it used to be a cutout of the Confederate flag and star segment into the cement. And that's where I went to high school.
Man, that is stifling. Did you have contact with your father?
Not much growing up. My parents divorced very early. My mother and my father, I'm 25, and so by this age, I was already 4 to my mother. My mother was a year older than my father, so they had me very early on 20 and 21, and of course, if we were being stereotypical, that did not work out, and I did not have continued contact with my father. It was sporadic, and my father had his life to live and his own personal demons and conquests, shall I say, manly conquests to fulfill. My mother worked jobs from being a janitor to working at Arby's fast food to being a CNA at a hospital, and she's a small woman of short stature and lifting, patients with dead weight who were bigger than her. And she worked the mill. A lot of people on the other side of the family were mill workers. My mother worked for several mills when I was growing up, and at that same time she was also holding a job as a janitor at a school and then working at Arby's and doing everything that she could.
Wow. That is thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. Just for listeners, that would be like exhibit number 8050 for why I think we should really make an effort to refrain from picking on other non-white people, other black people for any reason, at least publicly, coming out and picking on other black people. Just the legacy of what so many of us and our mothers, grandfathers, aunts, uncles have had to endure. Just on that alone, we should, at least publicly, try to not pick on other black people. Okay. With all that laid down, 90% white high school with what it sounds like is minimum in the neighborhood of 2,100 or so students. Were you picked on or teased? Because to get to this point where you're on a full scholarship in a graduate program at Northwestern, you have to have had an extraordinarily successful academic career to date. Was that a source of conflict for white students or non-white students? Were you picked on for being so successful and being a black student?
I was. Growing up, I grew up in very modest circumstances, and I'm actually putting it lightly by saying very modest. We won't even go into the full detail of actually where I grew up, because that'll be exhibit number 1 million. And people will go, wow, how did you do that? But the situation was that being the first person in my family unit, my mother's and father's, to graduate from high school by degree and then go on to get an undergraduate degree now in grad school, first person. When I was in high school, I received a lot of slack from fellow African-American students, and who were, of course, extremely marginalized within that high school, that had lots of people wearing Confederate flags. And it was like something you see in a movie, but literally it was going on in my high school. It was something. In regards to white students, yes, that was also an issue, because I was the only African-American. Now, we're going to discuss a little bit of education disparity mirroring into this situation. I was the only African-American who was in the AP and honors classes through high school. The only one who was in all the consistent. There were a couple of African-Americans and Latinos who took, and of course a few Asians who took a couple of the AP, a couple of the honors. But I was the only African-American who was in all of my AP and honors classes. And I'm not, of course, surprised by that when we look at the state of affairs in public education and formal education, which I'm on the air. So I received a lot of slack from white students growing up. And being called the N-word, my first encounter with being called the N-word was in 6th grade band, because I was an instrumentalist. And 2 white students who played saxophone like me, one of whom's father was a big-time pharmacist in town, the other whom's father was a professor at a school in the area, turned around and called me pleasantly plump and fat, because I was quite overweight growing up, and if you saw me now, you wouldn't believe that. And then said, they said, not only are you pleasantly plump and fat, but you are a, quotation mark, you are the N-word. When they said that to me, I didn't know what to think. And that was the first elucidation of what I was to encounter from there on up. I knew that racism existed. My mother spoke about it, but that was the first encounter for me that was so visceral, so internal, so there. And that continued through high school, being called the N-word. And then when I came out of the closet my junior year of high school, of course, that was N-word plus, fag. It was continuous. And I had to, the only way that I dealt with that, and of course what was going on in my household, which was pretty desperate and wild, it was to drown myself in school, and was to drown myself in reading. And I've always been a good writer, and so it was to drown myself in writing and studying. And because I was not really athletic, then I was hard on myself with music, because I tried to compensate with that. And so over time, I just sort of, I believe, overcompensated for what I felt was a lack, because at that time I didn't realize that it was society and not me. I thought it was me. At that time I thought, well, maybe I'm not as good looking as that white student call me the N-word, or maybe I'm not really that smart, or my family is really poor. It hadn't yet occurred to me why these things were happening at that young of an age. And so I compensated for that through going overdrive in scholarly research and studying.
Fascinating. Context of White Supremacy. Our guest, graduate student at Northwestern University in Illinois, Mr. Timothy McNair. John Henryism. Are you familiar with either the story of John Henry or how that is applied 21st century to racism?
I'm not familiar with John Henry, how it's applied to 21st century.
Okay. Are you familiar with the mythology, John Henry?
I certainly believe so, if you were to certainly say.
Okay, with the railroad, he the black guy, he competes in driving the railroad stakes, and he wins, but his heart explodes after he's victorious.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay. They apply that to 21st century, how black people respond to racism. It's like everything that you just said about drowning in your academic studies, everything that you just said, white people have boiled this down into one term, calling it John Henryism. And they think that this might explain some of the health disparities that black people have, hypertension and some of the other health problems. It might be a stress response from racism and trying to work so hard. Everything that you just said, that's a theory that's out, and they call it John Henryism. Wow. I don't want to get off topic because I want to make sure we cover so much to touch on. I don't want to get off topic, but I did want to point this out because we've also been discussing this. Have you been around a significant population of black people where they were aware that, hey, Mr. McNair, he identifies as gay, homosexual, and if so, has that been a problem? Like, have black people mistreated you because of how you identify sexually, or has that been an issue for you with black people?
You know, this is really an interesting story, and I'd like to take it back to my high school since we were speaking about sort of how I was treated in high school and that little brief summary. Well, when I came out in high school, this is a sort of interesting story. I had my younger half brother who was there, and he was captain of the football team. He was everything that I wasn't. He was the athletic ladies' man, but then I was academically sound, and he wasn't academically sound. So we just balanced each other out, quite frankly. But I will have you to know that when I came out, I expected for many of the African Americans who had grew up in my neighborhood, which was predominantly African American and Latino, extremely low income housing, I thought that they would, hate me. I thought, and perhaps there was a little bit of slack, but I'll let you know that any time one of those rednecks, and they called themselves rednecks in high school, just loved it. We actually had a ramp in high school that was called Redneck Ramp, and they wore camo and Confederate flags. Sounds like a movie. It really happened. I will have you know that my half-brother, but also his friends and other African Americans, girl and guy alike, even if they might have not agreed with it because of a religious belief, they stood up for me. And quite frankly, I'll be blunt with you, they would have fought for me. I'm not sure if that's because of the context of the rednecks picking on me, but I will say at that time, I was so humble because they were willing to go to town for me, so to speak. And going throughout undergrad, of course, I've met some African Americans who, look down upon me being gay and the LGBT community in general. But I did my undergraduate and finished up undergraduate in New Orleans, transferred down there from a school in North Carolina. And the African Americans down there embraced me fully. They were there for me, and they knew that I was gay and treated me with a lot of respect. Now, I'm not sure if they would say that's because I'm not quotation mark flamboyant in whatever sense, but I did not receive a hatred from them. Now, I actually did receive hatred from other people who I didn't expect to, but from that African-American population, no, I did not receive hatred.
Has that continued I don't know. I don't know what the population of black people is in Evanston, but I feel like you're close to Chicago, so you should.
We are.
Okay, so are you around black people regularly?
Well, Evanston is lily white if there ever was one, and Evanston is like Chapel Hill where it's, like 98% white, and then the African Americans are annexed to that side of the town that, the police call dangerous. That's really what it is. Of course, that's our world. So, but in terms of school, I'm on several committees, and one committee I'm on is the Black Graduates Association. I'm on the executive board of the Black Graduates Association. And those African American men, quite actually most of whom are straight, identify as heterosexual, quite a few of whom are in relationships, are married and have children, are my brothers. You know, children of brothers. You know, I am openly gay with them. You know, we have events where we go out on town in Chicago, and, you know, if I'm standing there and I'm talking to another guy, you know, and if that other guy happens to be a romantic interest, or if there's someone I'm talking with, or if I'm just doing talk or flirting, they're fine with it. They don't get antsy, and they're very protective of me. So actually, they're a wonderful family here at Northwestern. That little unit of us that's here, I mean, you know, it's about 5%. I might be overestimating.
Okay. That's super important. That is just as important as everything else we're going to talk about today. I hope folks were paying attention. That is sound clip worthy right there. I'm so glad to hear that. Okay. Back to what's been going down with the music course. Now, before we get to the music class, I guess I got one more thing. Then we can get to Mr. Whitman. Language. The way that you speak, very polished. Is that something that's conscious? Is that a part of the overcompensation for being a black male? Or did that evolve in response to something else?
Interestingly enough, I was on WBON radio in Chicago, and they didn't ask me about my background like you did, but they assumed in speaking to me, which would be an assumption I guess some people make, they assumed that I came from an upper middle class, actually compared me to Barack Obama, which was really hilarious to me, because we don't have anything close to the same background. Now, Walt Patrick, the governor of Massachusetts, and I have similar backgrounds. Who's from Chicago and lives on the South Side. I would say that me, like, again, if I was comparing myself to like a DePaul Patrick who grew up on the South Side of a single-parent home and then went to Harvard for undergrad, Harvard for JD, I would say that part of it was perhaps, at least for me, I'm not going to speak for him, was that my mother, sadly, at that time, mandated that I spoke a certain way in the household and spoke a certain way in order to achieve in the scenario that I was growing up in, which under those circumstances made sense, and it was the best that she needed to do. Now, my family, of course, and as you can imagine, we call that acting white. Like, anyways, especially in the South, where there's also African-American vernacular. And I had to realize years past that, oh, wait, African-American vernacular is a language, and there's no such thing as proper English. Proper English is the myth of white supremacy. So the way that I articulate and speak has been this way since around age 6. There's actually early recordings of me that my family has singing like hymns or speaking in church. And I learned how to speak a lot because I actually learned the Bible a lot. Not that I necessarily identify as a Christian now, but I read the Bible and studied the Bible a lot because church is not an option. And so actually how I articulate and learn how to speak these words and learning Greek origins and Latin was really instituted in the actual church. And so this is sort of actually what you're looking at and hearing is a branch off of, truthfully, orator skills that were built in the African-American church.
Wow. As you were speaking, I hadn't thought of it until you brought the church aspect up when you were talking about the Bible. And I was like, wow, he sounds like James Earl Jones. And then I remember like, oh, they got him to read the Bible. That's you should just read the Bible. We would have another James Earl Jones recording of the Bible.
The voice was a little higher then. Some things hadn't happened at that age.
Wow. Do you get that? Do people compare you to James Earl Jones?
Oh, relentlessly. It's James Earl Jones, and then if they see me, they say I look like Tiger Woods, and then they ask me that, sadly, for some reason, I'm not racist, this white person, I'm not racist, but has anyone ever told you that you look like, who, Tiger Woods? Yeah, she looked just like Tiger Woods from high school, and that was called Tiger Woods, and then I spoke like James Earl Jones, so I'm the furthest thing from Tiger Woods you can imagine, but...
I don't see the Tiger Woods thing. James Earl Jones, that's reasonable. Even if a white person said that, that's reasonable. But Tiger Woods, that's a little dubious. Okay. With moving to Walt Whitman, I was curious because you said you were on the radio station there, and they compared you to President Obama. Like, you don't have to get into too much detail, but how were they making this connection between you and the president?
Well, there was an African American. I believe he's a higher up in finance and some business, and And it was after I was on the air live, like we are now. So I was listening on the off the air live, and of course at that time I was just eating cereal and tending to my body, which I neglect when I'm doing lots of things. But he said that Barack Obama had this coming of blackness experience, right? In whatever sense that we are trying to define that. The speaker who was on this program, he wasn't not the MC, but he was speaking with him. And he said that it was, when he went to Harvard and, of course, when he was at Columbia, that certain things happened to him that made him realize the social stratifications of being black in America. And he said, and perhaps Timothy, you can tell from the way he speaks, he's probably from that type of background, maybe a middle class African American, and this is his experience of elucidation. And I said that we wanted to call in and just sort of, I don't want to say set him straight, but then again, yes, I did. I sort of wanted to set him straight and say, you might not want to judge somebody by the way that they speak and articulate without truly knowing where they come from, because it's perhaps on par with things that you see on the west side and south side of Chicago, or worse, But to judge a person like that, I mean, think about Angela Davis and how she speaks and articulates, And so it's amazing that then we put a stamp on, well, he's from this privilege, which makes sense because it is acting, in a sense, it is speaking white. But he tried to compare me to Barack Obama and saying that because of the way that I spoke, somehow I had the same identity as Barack Obama, and I had a little bit of contention with that.
Understandable. Context of White Supremacy, again, Mr. Timothy McNair. I want to get to Walt Whitman, get in some questions about that. Then we'll see if Justice has some questions. If you are listening in, if you have questions for Mr. McNair, the number to dial is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Press *6 if you have questions. I have to remember Dr. McGriff. He's in North Carolina. He has a very similar story to yours. I won't take time with it right now, but if you all remind me before Mr. McNair exits, I will mention Dr. McGriff, and I will email you one of his reports. NPR just did a study on him where he was talking about his experience of racism. He's a doctor in North Carolina. Very similar. I can't even, it's incredible. Anywho, Walt Whitman, before you get to being at grad school at Northwestern, you said that you took a sociology course on Walt Whitman, who is a legendary literary figure, 19th century. He wrote about slavery, abolition, black people. What did you learn about Walt Whitman in your sociology class?
Well, it was actually an English literature class taught by a sociologist, if that makes sense. Like a person, of course, that people who do like FM studies and sociology also teach English literature classes, and then it's sort of catered to their research interest, and that was what it was. But it was basically a sociology class. We were reading Alice Walker. What I came across was, first of all, my professor, who was a woman, saying that she did not like Walt Whitman, but that we wanted to explore the controversy of Walt Whitman. And the whole idea, interestingly enough, is sort of what pulled the wool off my eyes in one sense. And it was sort of, she was creating an environment where we were fostering and discussing founding fathers, basically, and people, controversial figures. And if we exonerate them for actually what were hateful views based upon what they contributed. So whether that was misogyny and racism and all this. So Walt Whitman came up, and it was interesting in our class because we only stayed on him for about a week or so. But she had us look at a book, actually, that was written by a professor who's at the University of Wisconsin. And it was called A Companion to Walt Whitman, and I would like for you to possibly Google that after this. And in the book, there were all of these poetic summaries from Walt Whitman, and then followed by a statement that he would say about America, his vision for America, would be followed by what he truly had to say about African Americans and slavery, and how he did not see it as the plight of African Americans, but the plight of white America. And the idea of him being an abolitionist was not out of goodwill towards all men, even though African Americans were considered men, but it wasn't towards African Americans. It was for white America, which makes total sense, but somehow when people read Walt Whitman, they take a poem that was written in that time by that white man and put it in today, thinking that he was really talking about the America today. Now, in some ways he was, because the myth of white supremacy is still lingering, and of course racism is here and proud, but it's interesting that we would take poetry by this man and we would try to put it into a 2013 context and say, he's speaking about our America. It was not the same America at that time at all.
Coincidentally, I happen to have some excerpts from A Companion to Walt Whitman. This is fascinating for a myriad of reasons because I will just hush and read. Walt Whitman's poetry had been fundamentally involved in the development of African American literature since shortly after his death. As George B. Hutchinson has shown, writers such as Alan Locke, James Weldon Johnson, and Gene Toomer, as well as Langston Hughes, all cite Whitman as a major influence on their writing. Locke's connection was direct. He lived his high school years, 1898 to 1900, just a block from Whitman's house in Camden, and his mother was involved in many of the same political groups as Horace Trabell. More so than any other group writing during the modernist era, these Harlem Renaissance writers were able to digest Whitman's attitude towards politics, the body, and sexuality, as well as his aesthetic. Aesthetically, Whitman's use of the American vernacular provided them with an alternative to Paul Laurence Dunbar's dialect poetry. And both Johnston and Hughes wrote early poetry in the Whitmanian style, including Hughes's famous poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, before they turned to African American culture for their sources. So we can see Whitman's legacy in Johnston's use of the African American sermon in God's Trombone's 7 Negro Sermons in verse, and Hughes's use of jazz and the blues in Weary Blues and Fine Clothes for the Jew. Throughout his career, Hughes promoted Whitman's work, editing 3 collections of his poetry and including some of Whitman's poems in his anthology, The Poetry of the Negro, and in 1953, writing in the Chicago Defender, he called Whitman the Lincoln of our letters and consistently urged African Americans to read his poetry. Because Hughes did not partition off the political from the physical or the aesthetic in Whitman, it's not surprising to find him offering a version of Whitman that differed markedly from that of the other modernist poets. In his 1946 essay, The Ceaseless Rings of Walt Whitman, Langston Hughes praised Whitman as a spiritual shapeshifter, able to transcend his own physical and historical limitations in order to sympathize with all oppressed people. Hughes locates the germ of this in Whitman's friendship with young black children in his own childhood. There had been a half dozen or so slaves on the ancestral Whitman farm. This is all Langston Hughes that I'm reading here. And young Walt had played with them as a child. Perhaps that is where he acquired this sympathy for the Negro people and his early belief that all men should be free, a belief that grew to embrace the peoples of the whole world, expressed over and over throughout his poems, encompassing not only America, but the colonial peoples, the serfs of Tsarist Russia, the suppressed classes everywhere. His spiritual self roamed the earth wherever the winds of freedom blow, however faintly, keeping company with the foiled revolutionaries of Europe or the suppressed coolies of Asia. Langston Hughes, this is all in A Companion to Walt Whitman. So you've got famous, legendary Harlem Renaissance Langston Hughes singing the praises of Walt Whitman. Do you think maybe you're in error? Maybe you got it wrong?
I don't think so at all. I think that's one of the situations that we can bring into this to talk about, and there's all sorts of other components and contemporary issues that mirror this. And actually, I was chatting with a person with CBS News about that they were mirroring Wagner and Israel and Jewish people wanting Wagner to be performed in Israel when others don't want it to be. I don't think that we can ever take, first of all, the opinion of one minority or one person of color and make it the opinion of everyone's. And what has happened with the situation at Northwestern is I've had certain people saying, well, this was a black person who's not offended by this, so, why are you offended by it? No, we rarely ever do that to white Americans. We don't ever take one and say this is the stamp of how they all should think and act. We always do it for African Americans. Now, that's just the aesthetic out the way. Getting to the core of the situation, we have to realize that a lot of African Americans have praised and advocated for people who are in their best interest. We have to look at Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. Now, this might come as a shock to some people, but, she wasn't exactly a friend of we black folk. And it's with a certain degree of cynicism that people would imply that she was for African Americans. Margaret Sanger wanted to control, wanted to exterminate, wanted to practice eugenics on African Americans. That's blatant fact right now. But on her board, we had people such as Martin Luther King Jr., we had W.E.B. Du Bois, who were praising her and serving on her board of Planned Parenthood. And she wanted to, in a certain number, lessen the number of African American births and eradicate, whether that was disguised as something good for the community and that we needed less birth because of poverty, and she was trying to disguise it as, this racist, sort of flattering racism, if we can even call it that. Well, it's better for African Americans because, they are more prone to crime and they're very poor and therefore they shouldn't have children. And that was Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. Now, I'm not a Republican personally, and I think women should be able to do with their bodies whatever they want to. But we have to realize that the woman who came up with this was not against eugenics and was not against population control of African Americans. So we're getting back into Walt Whitman and Langston Hughes. We have to realize that the circumstances under which African Americans were supporting and advocating white Americans and what they were reaching out for or getting reached out to in reverse were under a different parameter and set than we are currently. Not all the way, because I can tell you from this situation that there are mirrors to this, but we have to realize that for an African American to have taken the company of a white American at that time, or for a white American to have praised an African American, for instance, having W.E.B. Du Bois on the board of Planned Parenthood, that was social elevation for him, sadly. And that's not to diminish Langston Hughes or W.E.B. Du Bois, but it was a sign of social elevation, of acquiring what we know sociologically is called whiteness. That if you associated with this white person or they gave you a perk, or if you praised them, there was hopefully some merit in it for you, some compensation in it for you. Whether you were associating with them, whether you got some domain that they gave you, some power that they gave you institutionally, which hasn't really changed, or whether you got some other benefit from it that we don't know of. But we do know that historically that people have piggybacked off of some of the white scholars in thought of, well, I need to show myself as marketable or as good enough or as a well-read poet to the white society. So how then can I reach a broader public than to talk about somebody who they worship and know? It's to talk about somebody who they worship and know. And that's not to say that's all of Langston Hughes, but that's a good part of it.
Wow. Just to share a bit more information, great VGQ response right there. Victims Guarantee Qualification. Outstanding response. Just to share a bit more information, I guess one thing I will throw in, I think that strategy that Mr. McNair brilliantly articulated is still in effect. I think we've been talking about that on Saturday, and how you end up with someone like Chris Rock saying that one of his greatest comedic influences was Woody Allen. And we were talking about that then. Like, who even knows that Woody Allen does stand-up comedy? Like, really? But anywho, to share. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm laughing at that because I didn't even know Woody Allen did stand-up comedy.
Exactly. If anyone finds any video of Woody Allen doing stand-up comedy, I would love to see it if it's on YouTube or what have you. But I never. Right on. I will share a bit more just to add to the perspective. You heard Langston Hughes' perspective. He is a victim of racism, so he can say whatever he wishes. This is just adding information to what we already have. This is from a different biography on Whitman, and there are tons. White people have devoted a lot of time to discussing and dissecting his work and his view on black people, because he wrote a lot. He wrote a lot about black people and slavery. He was alive during the Civil War, so, it was a time where a lot of people were writing and talking about racism, black people. So this is from The Better Angel, Walt Whitman in the Civil War. Read a little bit just to add perspective. Talking about, since Langston Hughes accurately said that Mr. Whitman did spend some time around black people when he was growing up. From the book, one of his closest companions as a youth was a freed slave named Old Mose, who was the living embodiment of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom. He was a very genial, correct, manly, and acute, Whitman recalled, and a great friend of my childhood. When the family moved to Brooklyn, Whitman mingled freely with blacks who made up 10% of the borough's population and were even poorer, if that was possible, than the Whitmans and their working-class neighbors. Although Whitman would later salute the, this is in quotes, the dim-descended, black, divine-souled African, large, fine-headed, nobly formed, superbly destined, on equal terms with me, end quote, he was rather less welcoming to the African Americans of his own country, this is in quotes, who believes that whites and blacks can ever amalgamate in America, end quote, he asked in an editorial written for the Brooklyn Daily Times in May 1858, end quotes again, or who wishes it to happen. Nature has set an impassable seal against it. Besides, is it not America for the whites? And is it not better so? End quote. He would put the matter even more crudely in an aside to Horace Trebell 30 years later. That is one reason, this is all in quotes, that is one reason why I never went full on the nigger question, he said. The nigger question would not turn, would not do anything for himself. He would only act when prompted to act. No, I should not like to see the nigger in the saddle. It seems unnatural. End quote. Given such views, it is not surprising that Whitman's erstwhile publisher, Charles Eldridge, would later observe, I never knew him to have a friend among the Negroes while he was in Washington. Of the Negro race, he had a poor opinion. He said that there was in the constitution of the Negro's mind an irredeemable, trifling, or volatile element, and he would never amount to much in the scale of civilization. Now, I could read a whole lot more of these. This just goes on and on about him calling black people niggers and, all the standard things you would associate with someone who is a racist. Given that there are a lot of white people that you could track down who had similar thoughts, 1800s or even 2013, why is this such a big deal? Like I said in the email that I sent you, George Washington owned slaves. I'm sure you have had or do have right now a dollar bill in your pocket. You're not protesting dollar bills. Why is this such a big deal that you can't recite one measly poem by Walt Whitman that does not have anything to do with black people? He's not calling us niggers or anything else. One measly poem. Why is this such a big deal?
Thank you for that question. That's at the helm of what I really want to discuss as well. It's simple. I was talking about there were things that mirrored the controversy of, a person from the oppressed group that Whitman, African Americans, that he spoke about talking in favor of him, Langston Hughes. Then there was, of course, so my mirror to that, it was what I said earlier about Jews who actually are not opposed to having Richard Wagner's works being performed in Israel, which they performed twice, but that it's still banned to a big extent. But it's a controversy. The point of the matter for me with Walt Whitman comes from the following. I've had colleagues who are Jewish saying, I have to perform Wagner. Well, first of all, you don't have to perform anything, do anything that you don't want to do. Let's just get that out. My grandfather says you don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. There are ramifications, you don't have to do anything you want to do. Secondly, visibility is a big issue in this. We know what Richard Wagner thought of Jews because, oh wait, who's the Hitler play throughout the entire Holocaust in concentration camps? You know, whose writings are well published with anti-Semite sentiment that have been researched in depth with dissertation and books and beyond. Now, on the other side, how many people have I met, even those who are in support of me, the hundreds and thousands who are in support of me that I'm so grateful to, who said, we didn't know this about Walt Whitman, or maybe they didn't know who Walt Whitman was at first, but if they did know of him, they didn't know this detail of him. So, if we're going to perform something by somebody, and the song is titled A Song for Democracy, and first of all, our country's not really democracy, so I wish we'd get out of really saying that, but A Song for Democracy, it's labeled, and it's, with poetry by Walt Whitman, I cannot stand as a man of color and perform this work by this man when I know that the piece was written for an all-white high school at that time. Obviously, it was not integrated. Obviously, desegregation had not begun at that time. And when we know that in the poem, even though it's not racist, there are still imperialist, a lot of hegemony in the actual poetic setting, where it's discussing we are going to sell our ship and Asia is by thy side, America, and, over the waters, this whole thing of we're expanding and expansion and all of that stuff, which helped to create, Native American tragedies that we have in our very eyes today. It is a big deal because of all of that. Because I find a problem with the fact that we seek to exonerate someone of things that they did by either saying they were a man of their time, which is just a horrible lame excuse, or by saying, well, they were an amazing poet and they wrote great things. Well, that's great, but he can be an amazing racist poet. Why can't we just put it that way? I'm open to the performance of a Walt Whitman poem if perhaps we would have more books published on Walt Whitman's personal thoughts on African Americans, if we would have a pre-concert series lecture, since I'm at this quotation mark liberal school, progressive school that barred me from class, if we could have a pre-concert lecture discussing what was the democracy that Walt Whitman was talking about. Because I find it a little insulting that we would say that it was the democracy that we're in right now. And so it is visibility. And when I, as a student of color, say that I will not perform it under this circumstance, to have the disregard of a white professor, and then that he will expect that I would react and perform the piece because there's two other African Americans in the class who have not expressed their views, but who are performing it, is racist. Why would you think that every African American thinks alike if you were not a racist? Why would I have to have an opinion of Walt Whitman as an African American when there's factual analysis, critical analysis that people have done on this man? That it's sad, but it's more than just a simple Google. We have a scholar here at Northwestern who she herself is a Walt Whitman expert, and she was on the PBS special with 4 other Walt Whitman experts. One of them was from Columbia, they're from all these quotation mark elite schools. And as much as they were experts on Walt Whitman, they had to do an entire summation admitting, and which was easy for them because they were experts and hopefully they could, that he was a racist. So I'm not sure why it's being debated amongst my music professor who is not studied in anthropology, sociology, African studies, or anything of cultural history of the sorts, to debate whether or not Whitman was a racist or not. I mean, we know that's true.
Wow. Context of White Supremacy. Our guest, Mr. Timothy McNair. If you have questions, the number to dial 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Press star 6 if you have questions. I want to check in, see if Justice has a few questions she would like to ask. I'll give out the number one more time. We'll get the listeners after she is all done. Number again is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Press star 6 if you have questions. Justice, if you have questions for Mr. McNair, your line should be open.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Greetings, Mr. McNair, is it?
Yes, hello. Or you can call me Timothy.
Hi, it's actually Justice. That's my name.
Hello, Justice. I'm Timothy. Mm-hmm.
Hi. Okay. I'm sorry. I thought you said Jonathan for a second. Okay. Okay. Hi. I'm not quite sure how long it's been since you got assigned the Walt Whitman poem, but have you decided if you're going to read the poem or not read the poem?
I have, and what it was, Justice, is it's in a class. It's called University Chorale at Northwestern, and as a first-year Master of Music student in voice and opera, I'm required to take 3 quarters of this class into 1 quarter, so I took it fall, I took it winter, and this is spring I'm supposed to take it. I mean, nothing but A's in this class, as we know. So it was actually a music composition, so music set to the poetry of Walt Whitman. So either way, it is reading the poem, so it's just singing it. I have decided that no, I will not do it, and that is why I was barred from class, is because I was given an ultimatum that either I was to do it, even though I said I would perform the other 2 pieces on the concert, because there's 3 pieces, and I would not perform that one, but the professor gave me an ultimatum and said, you cannot come to class if you will not perform this piece, even though you perform the other 2. And even though I've made A's in the class and have actually completed a concert already this quarter, I've actually already done coursework, and I made nothing with 4.0s. And so I was barred from class by saying I would not perform this piece under these circumstances. So I decided not to, and therefore I'm out of class.
Have you ever been called a nigger?
Yes, I have, Justice. What I was just speaking earlier was I was called, my first memory of being called the N-word. I'm sure I was called it under some person's breath when my mother was, strolling me around as a baby in a grocery store. But blatantly, my biggest vivid memory was in 6th grade in the South, in my small little rural community, and 2 students, we were in band, musician, and turned around and they called me fat first, which I was used to being called because I was overweight, but then they said, not only you're that, but you're a nigger. And that continued. Being called the N-word where I was from was just like being said, hi, how are you today?
Justice, you still there? May have hit your mute button. Just checking.
I can hear you clearly.
Can you hear Justice?
I cannot hear Justice, actually.
Oh,
Justice,
okay.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm not hearing her either. I don't know if you hit your mute button or not, but we are not hearing you. If you're there, if you want to maybe just hang up and dial back in, see if that clears the problem. If you did not hit your mute button, but we're not hearing you, not hearing anything. While we sort that out, I'll get one of our callers in, and then we'll see if her line is open. S. Dot, did you have a question for Mr. McNair? Your line should be open. S. Dot.
Yes, good evening. Timothy, it is?
Yes, Timothy. How are you doing?
As well as can be expected. First and foremost, I want to applaud you stepping up and saying something about this. Particularly for me, it resonates because when I was 12 years old, I went to Walt Whitman Junior High School in Brooklyn, New York. And we had to do an essay on Walt Whitman. And when I did the research and discovered a lot of very racist material on him, and I included that in my essay, I got an F. Although the teacher at the time said it was well written and all this other stuff, the teacher said that that wasn't what the essay was supposed to be about. And I said, well, you told us to write an essay about who was Walt Whitman, and that's what I wrote. So I personally want to thank and appreciate you for bringing light to who Walt Whitman is as an individual. That was just my comment.
Well, may I have your name again, because I want to speak with you for a second.
S. Scott.
S. Scott? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, S. Scott. S. Scott, you just truthfully touched me. I'll be honest. I got chills listening to that. Primarily, I was in an interview early this morning with Chicago Crusader talking about something similar, and I really want to keep you on for a little bit just to talk about this. And we were discussing, I was in a meeting with the Illinois NAACP president, George P. Mitchell, and he was discussing how there was a student at Northwestern where the professor called him lazy, and even though he made all A's, if you went down his transcript, it said A, F. And we were discussing, well, of course, what's the likelihood of this happening to people of color and African Americans? Well, for those of us who are hard workers and are perhaps candid and maybe some would call us gutsy, that's pretty common where we would have an arbitrary grade that's not in line with everything else that we do. Even if we do good work, we have A, F, or A, B, F. And what you just said resonated with me, because what Escott just detailed, and I hope all the listeners are listening to this, and I want to talk about this, is at the helm of the state of affairs in formal education, and it has got to change. It is so much more than just about me and my grade. What he just detailed was connectivity. We have so many students of color who their stories are unheard, where they are actually amazing students, but are being penalized with institutional racism and discriminatory, disguised as, well, the professor's voice is supreme. Only he can change the grade. No one can tell him what to do. The president can tell him what to do. And so if we have that racist professor, then we hit the glass ceiling, then we will get penalized. Students are penalized for speaking out on situations that are, quite frankly, oftentimes unique to them and not the professor. And so the state of affairs in formal education, an institution that was designed to perpetrate social structure and stratification and racism in the midst of white supremacy, is still been doing that when African Americans who are well-researched, well-read, who have factual analysis support, can be penalized for speaking the truth in these supposed openly liberal, open to discussion places. But wait, we can get F's in high school on this, we can get F's in college on this, and grad school on this, because you're speaking from fact research that sometimes, might I add, was written by a white person. And that is a huge issue, and I'm so glad, Scott, that you called in to comment, because what you said is at the core of the situation. It's beyond Timothy McNair and myself. It is about the state of affairs. And if we want to help eliminate educational disparity, we have got to address inclusion and diversity from a different angle than just numbers and giving financial aid, which they try to do to make it seem like they're doing something for us. We've got to approach it from, are they really being included? Are their views that are factually supported? Is their background, is it really being included? And we know the answer to that. So I thank you for calling.
Absolutely. Just on a final note, interesting enough you made that comment, because today my daughter, who is in the 7th grade now, I just came from her induction ceremony, and she was inducted into the 2013 National Junior Honor Society. And a few months ago, thank you. And a few months ago, she had to do a research paper on Egypt. And when I saw a lot of the material that they had given her as source material, I had material myself that I passed along to her, and she put that in her essay, her research paper, and her teacher seemed to be somewhat offended by it. She kept on questioning the sources of the information, and most of the information that I had given her had come from Dr. Bienen and a lot of his material, his source material. So she had her bibliography together, but the teacher almost made it seem as if she didn't want to recognize their scholarship because they didn't come from a Western perspective. That's my final comment. But thank you for coming on the show and sharing.
I thank you, Scott, for communicating even that final fact, because it's just truthfully what you're communicating is at the core of this situation, and it's affecting all people of color around this country. Thank you.
Right on. Congratulations on your daughter's honor as well. Justice. Yes, sir. I think Justice should be back with us. We will try it again. Justice, you want to continue?
Have you heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I watched a video on WGNTV.com, and on the video it said that your music professor wants you to perform a poem that a racist wrote. Although you refused to do that, even though you refused to read that poem that you think is offensive, your white music professor still wants you to perform that poem. Do you think your music professor practices racism, white supremacy?
Justice, what a great question. I'm going to be very candid and say he does practice racism. And you know, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, I hate to say it, sometimes it really is. Yes, he does. But, you know, whenever I can go into other instances of this professor beating on his chest and saying that he wanted a choir to sing music like Native American chant, and he started beating on his chest, making caricature of Native Americans, and got offended because I said that was insensitive and was a historical caricature of Native Americans, which is inappropriate. At our school, where the founder, we know, contributed to one of the largest mass genocides of Arapaho and Cheyenne Native Americans, which funded, the blood money, of course, funded Evanston, John Evans, and Northwestern, which was funded by John Evans. In this situation, we get the similar thing. It's that racist disregard. And several, quite a few of them, I'm pretty sure, and I know, have voted for Obama and say they're liberals, and they think because they're liberals, they're not racist. And I've got news for you. I'm a Democrat, but let me tell you, racism has no party. And I'm going to say one thing, that the disregard for someone's unique situation is at the core of racism. What's at the core, if we're talking about MLK Jr.'s letter from Birmingham that we all know, we know that it was, okay, the worst was not the KKK. The worst, when we're juxtaposing the situation, were those whites in the middle or on the left who kept their mouths shut and silent. That is a racism that I can't even put a stamp on. And he actually did comment on it. But he commented on everything around it on an aesthetic level, showing me that he did not want to talk about it. He talked about it was a song to sing, showing that he did not want to give regard to who Walt Whitman was and diminish my concern. He barred me from class in 2013 and wanting to give me an F, which we'll see if it happens in the next 2 weeks. And that's clearly racist.
I believe you contacted the NAACP about your complaint on performing the poem. Has the NAACP done anything ever since you contacted them?
Oh, yes, they have. I was invited to a meeting here in Evanston. I was called by, I'd like to thank Bob Jordan from WGN, who spoke to the Illinois President, George T. Mitchell, my friend, and I was invited to a meeting here and presenting materials to the board. And, of course, I'm not going to go through all the specifics of that meeting because those specifics are, of course, to that kind of meeting. However, we can talk about what's happened. What happened, the NAACP, George Mitchell, he himself endorsed a letter, which was very kind of him being the president, and sent it to Northwestern to the president, Warren Shapiro. It probably arrived actually last Wednesday because he emailed me on Saturday saying that it had been sent. And I have a copy of it here. And the email highlighted their advocacy, their candid advocacy for me. That it was clear that they were advocates for me. And they asked some very pertinent questions, as if, is it right that a student under these circumstances should be barred from class and failed? And, even with my transcript that they have on file supporting it. And they sent that letter in, and they've also listed, they told Northwestern's President Warren Shapiro, this is the second time that we've had to contact your university in less than a year, because Michael Collins who was the janitor who walked into his office and found a teddy bear with a noose around its neck. I mean, I'm from the South, and I'm an undergrad. I didn't hear about that happening in the South. I come to the Midwest, and my, oh my, noose around the teddy bear. I didn't know y'all were hanging people as much up here. And so, interestingly enough, that letter was sent to the president, and probably right last Wednesday or so. I have not received an invitation to a meeting with the provost or president. And I seriously doubt that George Mitchell have, and we're going to talk and deliberate on that in the future, but they have expressed sincere advocacy.
Do you think you can still get your scholarship and degree and still counter white supremacy racism?
Would you say that again, Justice? I want to make sure that I heard your question correctly so I answer it correctly.
Do you think you can still get your scholarship and degree and still counter racism, white supremacy?
That's it. Still count. Sorry, I heard it as encounter, but counter to both. Sam, I see where you're coming from. I do think that's possible. You know, unfortunately, in this world, well, in our country, but in this world currently, you know, at least they're saying supposedly for the next 20 years, but you know, we'll see. Hopefully, there won't be a mass genocide of Latinos. Who knows what's being planned by the Tea Party? But that is a great question, and I do believe that it's possible for me to get my degree from this institution. Now, under what circumstances will it be harder? What will I endure? Will I be liked? And then the question is, do I care about being liked? Okay, so let's answer all those. I'm not here on this world. I speak in anger with Dr. Walt Whitman. I'm not here on this world. I'm not breeding. And some people do breed for $1, some people do breed for a stamp. I am not here for that situation. Because me getting to quotation mark where I need to get, whatever that means, it's not okay if it means that I'm going to be slighting the opportunities for someone else who comes from my background, because I know of the hell that I've gone through, excuse my French, to get where I quotation mark got and going from a very unique situation that's just, I've heard many other Americans say, wow, we can't even compare that. I think that me getting my degree here, I am determined to do that because I came here to get my degree, and that's what I'm going to do. But will I get my degree when blatant myths of white supremacy are being thrown at me, and when what is fact is being thwarted by the myth of white supremacy and disguised as myth of white supremacy? I will be contestant of anything that seeks to demean a group and a people's, as Morgan Freeman said in an Oprah interview about his life, which is mirrored sort of what I'm going through. I am not willing to accept an operatic role. I am not willing to perform. And these are things, me stepping out of performance, that's quotation mark, not good for my career. But, if what's good for my career means what's good for supporting the myth of white supremacy, then by all means, maybe I don't need that quotation mark career in that way. And so I want to achieve whatever I have through honesty and through conviction so that it hopefully will affect the institution to what degree, and maybe that won't be until I'm gone, but hopefully that we can say, okay, well, there's one person, there is an African-American who went through the institution but contested things that were blatantly racist, and he still got his degree and all, and then still turned out well, but he was not willing to back down and to have the myth of white supremacy in his ears in order to just achieve an aesthetic piece of paper on the wall.
How do you go, how do you think you'll be going about doing that?
Well, interestingly enough, I've just been accepted into a graduate certificate program here at Northwestern, which is something that and lots of schools have this, of course, where, you'll have your field of specialization if you're a graduate student with this PhD or master's in whatever field you're doing. And if you want to get a graduate certificate in something, it can tack on. It's almost like an MA to what you're doing to say you've also specialized in this. Well, after speaking with the Director of Graduate Studies at the African American Studies Department here at Northwestern, which is a very good one, just some great people here in that program, I've actually been accepted into their graduate certificate program, which I plan to tack on and complete in my final year, which will be 2013, this year, 2014, next year. And so I'm going to be focusing a lot of my attention on, and this is why I was accepted into the program, and of course they knew about everything going on, is because I want to actually approach the dragon from its mouth, from the fiery mouth, because since I have been in this field, this very lily white, very Eurocentric, and all sadly, even though African Americans have done a lot in opera, let us not name all the amazing artists, and even Paul Robeson, who was the bass and through similar things. I want to approach it from a musicological standpoint, where I want to approach the Western quotation mark musicology, which is still a racist terminology, and I want to look at staging racism and stage racism with opera performing, and how performing artists, and in particular because of my sensitivity to the situation, classical performing artists, and on the stage opera musical theater, how in scores, librettos, and in casting and in the industry, how race is perpetrated, and then how people of color are used to continue that social stratification. So what I'm going to be doing here, my last year here, is combining the African American studies component with that and doing independent study research on that, using what I know and my personal experience with other supported analysis. And ultimately, I would like to someday actually get a PhD joint in either musicology and Afro studies or Afro studies, and concentrate on the performing arts industry, and then also do analysis on classical music industry racism, segregation, and as portrayed on the stage and through music. And so that's going to be a focus that's going to propel me forward through this degree, because if it's not evident right now, I'm pretty passionate about it, and I'm really irritated over these things happening. And so being able to absorb my energy into that is going to help a lot.
The music professor says that you have to read this poem or you will be banned from the music class, and you take this poem to be racist and offensive. Do you think your professor is really trying to help you get a scholarship and a degree, even though you say this offends you?
Great question. Well, certainly he's not trying to help me at all in that case with an S. It's not in line with anything else, and he's not trying to help me keep a scholarship either. But my professor, what he's trying to do is to maintain what is either in the front of his head or in the back of his head of institutional racism and white privilege, where, well, I didn't mean it's racist, it's really not racist. Not thinking about the context wherein it was said. That's the white privilege point. And in regards to me getting my degree, obviously, when you want to get a student who has over a 3.7 at Northwestern on a full endowment, it's actually not just a scholarship, it's actually an endowment. So to be a student on an endowment is rare, because normally they have professors on endowments, but I'm actually sitting on an endowment. Which, interestingly enough, actually is Eckstein, actually, was a Jewish family, a rich Jewish man who dedicated his life to the arts here in Illinois, was a multi-billionaire. Actually gave a lot of money to Northwestern, actually was endowment on, and so, yeah, it's just really funny all this is happening. But it is a way for institutional racism to increase. It's a way to say, well, if you don't buck the status quo, we're going to buck you up, or we're going to buck you out the door, which luckily all my other grades are really high, so good luck with that. But it is a way to try and put a slant on something that's hopefully, that they're hoping is permanent, a record, and disseminating F. Now, most people looking at someone's transcript when they see F, I mean, a big question is going to be, was the student sick? I mean, did somebody die? I mean, what happened? So, if that F is there, although I'm confident it'll be changed with the amount of attention this is getting, especially with NAACP support, and we're going to have Rainbow Push Coalition coming on, hopefully, is that they're hoping that it can push me down in my professional life, and hoping that it can suppress what I'm able to do and oppress my life to further school. They're hoping that this stamp, that this will be a permanent stamp, that, okay, you're the troubled Negro, and we're going to stamp you that, and we're going to brand you like we used to do to slaves, and we're going to stamp you. And that's what they're hoping to do, and hoping to say, well, we're going to make sure you don't have a career. When in fact, this whole situation, I'm doing Afro studies with this, is actually probably going to help me to get a great career, quite frankly, in the terms of, it's not about what I want to do performing, it's about what I want to do for the world. It's about the fact that I want to approach this topic and to say, listen, I've been through this. Escott's been through this. All sorts of people have been through this, and this is what's happening in this world, and this is what's happening in the field that I was in. And I want to show that this is a huge problem that's affecting formal education. And if we keep talking about educational disparity, we've got to address the fact that people are furthering this suppression and oppression by institutional racism, by the fact that you can take an arbitrary grade and put it on a student of color's transcript or record because they're using factual data, quite a bit of which was, again, created by some white man, and they're presenting it to you and saying, this is the problem. And then you're going to take that and use it against them, which does not make scholarly sense in this supposed liberal institution. And so what they're hoping is going to pull me down. I try to look at things positive always. I'm seeing it as, okay, this is an opportunity for me to really focus on things that are world problems and to, I can't solve them, but I can hopefully, with whatever energy I have and whatever brain I have, hopefully I can shed some light on it. Hopefully I can maybe write something about it and communicate that there's many more than me. This is not just about saving a piece and a grade. This is about the state of affairs of formal education.
Thank you for answering my questions. Gus, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you.
Context of White Supremacy. And we do have a couple other callers, but I wanted to, you touched on the other incidents of racism, white supremacy. I thought that was important. Patterns, making sure that we don't just view this as one isolated incident, and maybe Dr. Nally is just, maybe that's just one bad case and things aren't really that bad. Global system of white supremacy. This is from January 28, 2013, the Daily Northwestern. Maintenance worker finds black teddy bear hanging at desk. I'm also pointing out, because the first person who wrote a comment pointed this out, that they're reporting this January 28, 2013. This happened December 3rd. The first person to leave a comment said, wow, great job, Daily Northwestern, staying on top of racism on your campus, reporting this almost 2 months after the event happened. It had been reported elsewhere in publications that are outside of Evanston and the Northwestern community. So, yeah, I thought that was pertinent as well. At any rate, 2 months late, Northwestern warehouse associate Michael Collins arrived at his office in the Technological Institute basement on December 3rd, just as he had each workday for the last 5 years. But on this particular morning, Collins noticed something different about his office. A black stuffed panda bear, a gift from his niece that normally sits next to a stuffed white cat on his desktop, was hanging from a rope next to the desk, as if it had been lynched. When I saw the bear hanging there, it reminded me of black Americans getting hung and lynched, Collins said. That hit close to home because I have had a family member in my past, back in the 60s, who was hung in Mississippi. So to a black person, that's horrifying. Exhibit number 8,005,003. Collins, who said he is the only black employee among the almost 50 people he works with, said he immediately called university police to report the incident and later filed a report with the Office of Equal Opportunity and Access. University spokesman Al Cubbage said he learned of Collins' report last month. Cubbage called the issue a quote-unquote personal matter that was being handled internally by both university police and administrators. It was reviewed by the appropriate offices within the university administration, including university police, he said. Cubbage said any results of the investigation would not be disclosed publicly, in quotes. Prior to finding the bear, Collins said he had multiple race-related altercations at Northwestern with a white co-worker. This included him being the target on separate occasions of a racial slur and verbal threats, as well as arguments on Facebook about, of course, damn you, Obama, President Barack Obama's race. Now that is interesting. They were fighting about his racial classification. He said university police told him they were unable to prove the individual was the one who hung the bear. Since the incident, Collins has sent 2 emails to upper-level administration. The first, dated December 14th, was sent to President Morton Shapiro and others. Collins said Shapiro's response indicated it was the first the president had heard of the incident. He kind of apologized and said this should not be tolerated at Northwestern, Collins said. But more than a month later, Collins was disappointed he had not heard more from a level higher than his immediate bosses. He penned a second email January 17th, this time to more than 15 administrators. I have not heard from any of my bosses at facilities management to say, Michael, we are sorry this happened, he wrote. I also heard nothing in the way of preventing this from happening again to anyone at the university. Everyone is so quiet about the situation. I get the feeling the university just wants it to go away. Collins said he hoped for a better response from the guys that sign my paycheck and wanted to start a dialogue on having respect for other people's race, religion, and things like that. I've heard nothing, so I'm a little lost right now, Collins said. Sometimes silence is worse than saying something. I think we heard that before this program. Collins' case is the latest in a bumpy history of race at Northwestern among both staff and students. In February 2010, UP officer Freddie Lee sued the university for discrimination following his 2009 firing. He has a lot of videos on YouTube if you want to check that out, fired officer Freddie Lee. And last year, an off-campus party where students wore offensive costumes sparked campus-wide discussions on the state of diversity at Northwestern. Despite Collins' disappointment in the university's response, he said he did not necessarily see racism as a broader structural problem at Northwestern, at least among his immediate coworkers. Northwestern, the 5 years I've been here, has been a great place up until this happened, he said. Most of the guys down here are great. I've heard of incidents that happened, but I want to say it's just a few bad apples. Victim guaranteed qualification, as is Langston Hughes. I wanted to read a few of the comments and then get some of the callers. Did you have anything you wanted to respond, any commentary you wanted to add to that?
Oh, yes. Certainly. In regards to a few bad apples, Michael Collins, that first of all, it's similar in the fact of the lack of disregard, no response. That's the same thing going on in my situation. And mine's in public, probably even more than Michael Collins, But all of us at the university, people, I'm at the BGSA, I'm on the University Diversity Council. We hadn't heard of Michael Collins until like a month after it happened. We were just appalled, students of all races. But a few bad apples, I'd have to kindly disagree and say that when we have people who were throwing eggs on Asian students playing tennis last summer, and we had Michael Collins, we had me, we had the Mexican theme party where they were wearing sombreros and short little immigrants on it. And then we had the 2 Indian girls who were walking down the street, and the white girls say, "Can't you bitches speak English?" Now this stuff's only happened within about a year's time. So a few bad incidents within that's more than a few within 12 to 14 months.
There's quite a bit. It seems there was a march in response to what happened with Michael Collins and some of these other incidents that you can read about. Some of these incidents were also reported at the Daily Northwestern, which is the university's paper. You can check those out online. It's dailynorthwestern.com. You can probably just search for racism, some of the tags that are associated with it, and it'll pop up. I posted the article on Mr. Collins on my Facebook page. I'll tweet it out as well, so you can check that one out. Some of the comments I have said over and over again. I think I got this from Vicus at Reckless 2.0. When there are any sort of reports, particularly anything that goes viral, where a lot of people are looking at it, if it's on racism, you should check out the comments section. When people get online and they get some anonymity, they get that courage up, maybe they've had something to drink, they become very courageous and often very explicit. I wanted to share 3 that I thought were pretty interesting. These are no profanities, but they, I think, are pretty clear in making their point. The first one see, I'm going to read the names for the folks where they have a name, and then the ones where they don't, I'll just, So this first one was posted 2 weeks ago. And this is from the article. Matter of fact, before I get to the article, this is on the article. It's titled, Student Skips Music Class in Protest of Offensive Material. This is at WGNTV.com. Did any thoughts pop up with that title, Student Skips Music Class in Protest of Offensive Material?
Most certainly. And, Laura Duarte was a fabulous interview. I don't want to take it away from her, but I thought skips was not necessarily the appropriate detail. However, Louders herself on the air, on the news, I have to give her lots of credit, was very passionate and adamant about it. I mean, she called out the school. She said, it's amazing that the school is not even responding to the situation. Like Michael called me, she called it up twice, and then she aired it again at 9 o'clock the next day, and on a news segment to follow up about it. And I'm not sure who did that title. I doubt it was her, but student skips. I don't really know if that's appropriate. It should be student barred from class, which makes it the majority of which is on the internet, but the student skips is not entirely accurate.
We talk a lot about words, the importance of words on this program. That's one of those where I would say I suspect that could be a conscious act of racism, white supremacy. I'm just going to read you all the dictionary definition of the word skip. This is one, because this is one of those terms where it has a lot of definitions, but the verb sense of the word skip, fail to attend or deal with as appropriate. Miss, and they give you a sentence, an example. I wanted to skip my English lesson to visit my mother. Try not to skip breakfast. I know that used to be kind of a slang term. If you were going to not attend class, they would say, oh, we're going to skip English, or we're going to skip this. I think that might still be used. I thought just the implications of that, as though you're some, miscreant student who's just playing hooky, as opposed to someone with a 3.7 GPA who's on a full graduate scholarship, who's got straight A's, and who has been barred from class. I thought, I think if a white person wrote this, I strongly suspect that this could be an act of racism.
You betcha.
Some of the comments. I'll do 3 quick ones, and then we'll get to folks that dialed in. If you can give us 30-second response, I'll read, and then you can give us whatever you want to say in 30 seconds to each of these, and then we'll get our callers. First one, I'm a classmate of Mr. McNair, and I'm aware of his issues. This class is choir. Every graduate student is required by the university to sing in the choir. He knew this upon coming to Northwestern. As a singer myself, I can assure you that Timothy is not the first person to sing music, which he does not agree. Jewish students in the choir sing sacred motets by Bach, gay students sing love songs about women, and white students sing African American spirituals. Should I not study the music of Wagner because he was an anti-Semite? Mr. McNair would be wise to learn that if you dedicate yourself to a life of music, you commit yourself to something greater than yourself, to art that transcends human boundaries and limitations. Perhaps Timothy should consider the other 40 people in the choir he made a commitment to instead of publicly he can get out of this work. Perhaps Timothy should consider the other 40 people in the choir he made a commitment to instead of publicity he can get out of this. Talk about making a mountain out of a molehill. This is not news. This is a student who is looking for validation in all the wrong ways. Instead of having a closed mind to the writing of Walt Whitman, maybe he could come to the poetry and music with an open mind and try to see what the poet meant, not what he wrote. Comments?
Yes, well, first of all, I believe I can just say the comment of white American students having African American spirituals sort of puts that one in the loophole anyways and sums that one up. And the idea of music, well, let's ask just who, what, when, where, and why. So whose music are we performing? What is it made of? Where are we performing it? Where was it created? And why was it created? For whom? So let's just answer all of those questions, and I believe those are questions that the writer obviously did not want to answer, just like the professor, because if we ask those questions, then we're actually talking about something besides this aesthetic of music transcending boundaries. You know, music is interrelated to everything else happening in the world. It's not like people are composing music on Mars and sending it down into the world. People are getting raped, killed, slaughtered all across the world, and people were composing music out of nationalism and all sorts of things. And I didn't make a commitment to anyone in that chorus besides the principles that I was raised with, the principles that I've learned, and I made a commitment to myself to be always honest and forefront with my principles.
Right on. Next comment. This is Isolde Schmidt, I think. Next comment, written 2 weeks ago, with 104 thumbs up, mind you. The first comment that I read got 139 thumbs up. I would like to bring to public attention the fact that the concert in question, which is described in such a way that makes it sound like a solo concert, is in fact a choral concert. Timothy is singing as a member of an ensemble, I might add, that has other African American students, none of whom have taken issue with the Hanson song, the Whitman song, I think he means. Furthermore, Timothy enrolled in the course knowing that in order to complete it successfully, he must sing all of the chosen repertoire. He has not been a respectful member of the group for the majority of the quarter, showing up late or not at all for rehearsals or pieces other than the one currently being discussed, and has currently not made A's for the past 2 quarters, as he claimed in the interview broadcast on the 9 p.m. news. I say this in the hopes that his complaints to do no damage to a very talented choral director who is totally undeserving of such a selfish attack. Talking about Dr. Nally. Your response?
Well, now I really wish I'd sent you my transcripts, but I sent them. But just call up Boyce Watkins or call up WGN or call up NAACP, and all of you will have my transcripts with all the A's on them. First of all, I have no reason to lie, but we're not even getting on that because I did make A's the past 2 quarters. That's the done deal, and it's just obvious that a student wouldn't obviously be able to know that I made all A's or not. That's just something that they can't go into the database the school sees and pull up my transcripts. So that's already a load of trash and garbage, quite frankly. It's slants and trying to slant character. Secondly, in regards to me being a good student and laziness again, well, there we have highlighted the stereotypical racism, right, that they're pulling out. And the people who are writing this, quite a few, I mean, they're saying they're liberal. I mean, many of them sure really like they're liberal. And they are part of this course, and most of them are all white students, I'm sure. Well, that's just racism. You're saying that a student whom on paper, which people have my transcript showing all A's, you're lying and saying that I'm lazy and that I didn't show up for class. Well, if that's the case, then I wouldn't have made all those A's, nor would I, if that were the case, because we have attendance policy. I wouldn't have made all those good grades. So it's just a blatant slant of racism. That's to be expected that, you know, I'd have all my white colleagues liking the status and some of them going on more than once under different screen names or no name, posting different comments from different names and not identifying themselves. That's a cowardly act of racism that a lot of these liberal progressives take part in.
Wow, I was chuckling quite a bit there. Yeah, I noted that. I'm glad you pointed that out because some of these, it looks like the same person might have just come back and commented multiple times saying the same things and maybe even given themselves a bunch of thumbs up to really like their article because that seems to have happened here. But I'm glad you pointed out those patterns, and I hope people even remember when we were talking about Whitman, because it sounds like a chorus of white people for the past 200 years have been saying the same thing about black people, whether we've been slaves or president of the United States. You're lazy, stupid, late, and ignorant. They even said that about President Obama. Like, he was arrogant and lazy. They've said both of those about him repeatedly. At any rate, last comment, and then we'll get the other folks that dialed in. This person is writing under the handle, "You've got to be kidding." This one also has received 108 thumbs up to date. Timothy's past aside, I would implore WGN to get the facts right before reporting them and stop spreading sensationalist stories that clearly show a biased point of view and offer no insight into the intricacies and insanity of this situation. It would also be nice to not see comments that offer a different viewpoint removed from this forum, as has already happened twice. I'm sure Mr. McNair is behind that. Actually, when I read that the first time, I had to stop and I said, wait a minute, did he say Mr. McNair is getting the comments thing? Like, whoa. When I went back and I reread, it was like, maybe I misread that. I didn't see that right, but I read it. This is like the 5th time. I'm sure Mr. McNair is behind that. So apparently you are to blame for the comments being removed from the WGN TV website. Shame on you. Anyway, but WGN, stay strong. Keep our comments up. We're trying to present the truth of this story and offer a truly journalistic second viewpoint. Anyway, on with the show. This is an extraordinarily selfish attack on an extremely gifted choral director with whom Mr. McNair obviously has a personal beef. As a colleague of Timothy's at NU, I can vouch for the fact that Timothy is almost constantly disrespectful and self-centered. He has been a terribly inconsistent and destructive member of the NU choral ensemble, going so far as to drop out of a winter opera performance at the last minute and showing nothing but disrespect and a bad attitude towards Dr. Nally, who is wonderfully professional and diplomatic towards all students' needs. There is no way to do extra credit, end quote, in a choir, for goodness sake. As was stated in a comment that has since been removed, being in a choral ensemble is about being a part of something bigger than oneself. It is about creating music that will transcend human boundaries regardless of one's own personal beliefs. Muslims and Jews and atheists must perform music about a higher power different from their own when singing Bach or Handel. LGBTQ individuals must sing love songs aimed at those they are unattracted to, and perhaps by poets or composers who did not favor gay rights at the time of the music's composition. Whitman was a product of a different time, and while his supposed comments are undeniably racist and would be totally out of place in the 21st century, they were all too common in the mid-late 19th century when they were made. If Timothy decides he wants nothing to do with racists, he must never wear Tommy Hilfiger clothing again, who once stated he didn't want African Americans wearing his clothes, nor see a movie with Mel Gibson, nor perform anything written by Richard Wagner, a known Wagner, a known anti-Semite. He also shouldn't read or subscribe to the beliefs of anything written by any of the founding fathers who all owned slaves. I'm sure you all get my drift. Again, this one has 108 thumbs up thus far. Your response?
Yes, well, that first of all, I don't wear Tommy Hilfiger, actually, so that's interesting. Most people who've seen me with that dress would probably say that I don't own a Tommy Hilfiger. Now, as a child, I did own a Tommy Hilfiger, but enough about that, but I actually don't have a Tommy Hilfiger. Other points aside, that's another random fact about me. So first of all, we have the sheer paranoia of me somehow getting comments from all the WGN when I myself, as many people who are in the media are taught, we do not read the comment section. You know, I do not read my comment section. Now, the Black Blue Dog that I was on those comments, I did because, there were as many hundreds as there were for this. There were, 200, 300 for those. But it's interesting to me that we would cite all these logical fallacies and lies, such as the Windsor offer, in which actually it is well known throughout the university that I actually was stricken in performance with vertigo. I'm actually on disability with the university, actually, like it's on paper with the university, the disability services, because I have chronic migraines, and actually I had to get an MRI done, and I'd been having lots of vertigo in January. So on the night of the performance, I had a random stricken of vertigo, and then we figured out that I actually was having migraines. And, things like that happen at random. You can't really predict that's going to happen. So due to the fact that happened, actually, I did not have a choice in not being part of the opera. Actually, the opera director decided that I was not going to be in the opera because, in his words, he wanted to ensure my recovery and safety. So it was not me randomly dropping out of the opera. So there's all these slides to say things disrespectful, arrogant, self-centered. These are things that African Americans, of course, we get thrown at us all the time. You know, Kathleen Battle, who's a famous opera singer, and it's just up in the net. You know, all you hear about her is that she was the arrogant African American. I'm sure they say arrogant nigger, you know, amongst themselves. But quite frankly, if an African American is quotation mark well spoken by the white institution standards, if we are confident in ourselves, where we don't need someone to accept us, because there are lots of minorities, unfortunately, across elite campuses who don't want to be their race and color. And I'm really sorry, but I'm not that African American at all. And most people know that. You know, I speak with African American vernacular whenever I please, and I am who I am. You know, they're no ifs, ands, or buts. So there is, of course, that implication that I'm then arrogant because I'm not begging for acceptance. And I never will. I mean, they'll get blue in the face, and they'll drop dead, you know, from holding their breath, because I will not seek their acceptance. And that's what I'm calling arrogant. It's because I might have friends outside of the School of Music who are African American, who are African Studies and Sociology PhDs who would vouch for this. And I hang out with them because I'm on the exec board of the Black Graduate Association. And so I hang out with them because we do a lot of work for the community and all. And so I'm not always going to the parties of the Bienen students, because as is evident, they're all little cliques and, you know, feed into gossip and feed into lies. And obviously I want to be removed from that. I like having stable blood pressure when I can.
Amen. Amen. John Henryism. I want to get through the questions quick as we can. Let's see here. Just questions. Don't have time for a lot of chatting. Just get your questions in because I want to get to everybody. 1804, your line should be open. Did you have?
I'll be right back.
Oh, she'll be right back. Let's see. Lashes.
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, 1804. Sorry. No problem.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I apologize. I'm out in the street, so is the background noise terrible? I'll mute myself as soon as I've finished asking my question. First, I wanted to say that this reminds me of a show you had recently, or actually not that recently, Gus, where people were talking about being in grad school and how even in grad school, even in programs about race and racism, it was dangerous to speak the truth about white supremacy. So this confirmed that, obviously, this whole episode. But I'm glad that your guest has the courage to forge through with his convictions anyway. And second, I wanted to tell the guest that Mr. McNair, I apologize, that the head of the NAACP was recently on Democracy Now!, where he equated the families, the plight of the families of the white cops in the Assata Shakur case to the plight of the families of blacks lynched in the South historically. He also was one of the people who, along with Obama, along with the White House, had kind of thrown the woman who, gosh, I forget her name, but there was a woman who was associated with the Department of Agriculture and some
Cheryl Sherrod.
Exactly. He, the head of the NAACP and the NAACP generally had thrown her under the bus in the whole affair, where the White House wanted her to resign in conjunction with some attacks from very right-wing bloggers who alleged that she made comments that she never made about white farmers. But anyways, so in light of all of that, how much do you really believe that you can put your fate in the hands of the NAACP, since it seems like at this point it is not certain that is really an institution that fights white supremacy?
You bring in a great question, and this caps on yet something else. You know, this, what I'm going through, you know, really has a lot of different entities, and that's one of them. Well, I said this in NAACP, and I don't know if this pushed things to them, writing a letter or what, but they were already, the president already assured me in private that, he wanted to write a letter on my behalf. That's what they've done. But I said, people have been saying, well, the dean of your program, Senator Montgomery, who's dean of the Bienen School of Music, is black. And she doesn't find it offensive and as I said, we can't expect that every black person is going to help every black person, okay? And so I told them, and I communicated several times, I did not expect for the black dean at the Bienen School of Music to support me. I expected her to throw me under a bus. And that's definitely what she sort of did. She just sort of let the bus hit me. Well, tried to. And that's because what is there for her to gain in losing the situation, Gee, she's a dean, but does she really have power like Obama? And I said before, I'm going to probably be people that are really seen as a radical and hate me because I'm saying this, but, you asked the question, and I sense our noggins are in near the same way. But does Obama really have that much power when in 2008, when Harry Reid, who is the Senate Majority Leader, could stand up and say he had no Negro accent, he was like, that whole, racist thing, and he said, well, that's nothing, I believe a lot of the African Americans, and even talking about the NAACP president, we have to see who's paying them, who's putting them in positions, who's giving them money. And if we peel back that layer, we'll start to say, gee, why are they, allowing oppression to, carry out more amongst other African American people who they should identify with but don't? Well, it's because a lot of times they are seeking to gain or maintain a leverage, and sadly, at the expense of someone else who they could help but don't. And so in terms of asking the question about the NAACP and their help from them, so far on a statewide level, as part they have done a blatant act of showcasing advocacy, which they did for Collins, Michael Collins as well. Beyond that, I am not sure what will happen. In the meeting, however, quite a few of them in the meeting on the board, it was the executive board, seemed very passionate about it. But I'm not sure from that because this was actually a local meeting because the state president is also the president of the Evanston branch. So I don't yet know perhaps what the board of Illinois that he's the president of thinks and further than that, And I'm never, ever too confident that, sadly, and it's so sad to say this, but I'm going to be honest and say it, I'm never assured that my race will help me. And it's not because people in my ethnicity are bad or a race are bad. It's also because there's an oppression in society that tells them that if they want to get forward and if they want to make money or if they want to do whatever they have to do, they need to keep their mouth shut and just work hard and do whatever it takes to succeed. And that's an oppression, and a flattering oppression that will make sure you're part of the institution of making you a dean or a president or whatever else, but you're really not part of the institution. You're still unequal. You still got to do what we say or else we're going to make things very difficult for you. So there's an oppression to even keep your mouth shut.
Did that answer your question, 1804?
Yes, I'm in a noisy place, which is why I'll mute my line. Thank you, Mr. McNair, for your answer.
Thank you very much for your question. I appreciate it very much.
Lashes, did you have a question for Mr. McNair? Your line should be open. Lashes?
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. McNair. I have a question that's pretty much on par with the question from 1804. Are you willing to compromise on your stance if need be?
And may I ask, this might be a pretty big question, under which circumstances would a compromise be?
Under circumstances of the NAACP, for example, has a good track record of appearing to want to help a victim who happened to be African American, and some way, shape, or form down the line, they would like try to coach or persuade the victim to compromise for a fee from the perpetrator. And when they do compromise for the fee, the victim that is, the NAACP coops some, funding from that compromise.
Yes. Most certainly.
So that's why I posed that question.
Yes, that's a very good question. So I see what you're talking about, compromise. I am not willing to do anything for a fee that is going to make me contradict the beginning of the situation. For me to down the road say, oh yeah, it didn't really matter that much, and let's just whatever. I don't know how people would come in, but if that were to hypothetically come into the radar, it would just look. It would look stupid, right? And as passionate as I am, and with truth on my side, that's something I would do. And you are right that I see what you're saying about the fee thing, so I'll leave it at that. I won't talk about that, but I see what you're saying. But I am personally not moved to compromise. Now, compromise for me is a different term, and this, I guess, sort of sounds like when my father used to say compromise, it really wasn't a compromise. But for me, it's you leave my grade alone. And, they barred me from class. Okay, they barred me from class. You can say a formal apology about that and get an infraction from that, and whatever they want to do to try and mitigate for that, they can do. But my grade needs to be left alone. I'm not going to compromise on a grade. I'm not going to compromise on the situation. I'm not going to come out and say anything that was just a misunderstanding, because that's something that always is blanketed. We know. You know this, Ted asked that question. It was just a misunderstanding, and now we've mitigated and mediated. Well, that's just really not what's going to happen. It was a misunderstanding on their behalf when they thought that they could bar me from class in 2013 and fail me and think that it wouldn't, result in, public repercussion. That was the misunderstanding.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Context of White Supremacy. Again, our guest, Mr. Timothy McNair. Before we wrap things up, the irony you getting, but this is, again, a grad student on a full scholarship, 3.7 GPA, stellar academic record. He has been barred from class because he does not want to read the poem of someone who referenced black people as niggers and apes and either wanted them repatriated or just wanted them separated or wished that they would die off eventually. You can go and research this for yourself, but barred from class on that. They just had a report, and they did two. I think I played one, and they just did a follow-up. They are getting rid of school suspensions. They are just passing legislation. White people have done studies, and they've said this is really terrible. This is one of the worst things you can do to a student, someone who's in an academic setting, to bar them from that environment. It fast tracks them to prison. They were talking about high school students. It fast tracks them to prison and disrupting the whole learning process. This is one of the worst things, particularly for anything. And they called it willful defiance, like where you don't obey the teacher. They ask you to sit here and you don't want to sit there, or something trivial. They were saying that these offenses are racist, where it's black people who end up being suspended from school for these really silly offenses, something trivial, or they said something the teacher didn't like or something to that effect. And they were saying that this is it's an easy way of dumping black people out of school. And we have a 3.7 grad student who has been, for all intents and purposes, suspended from this class because he doesn't want to recite the work of a racist. That's the system of white supremacy. The Chicago school closings, which is another illustration of white supremacy, in my opinion. You're right on the doorstep with everything that's been going down, from the strikes that were back in September during the election to now all of the schools being closed, and racism, white supremacy has been a major part of this conversation. If you have been following those events, do you have any thoughts on what's been occurring?
Right, I've been following as much as I can with my schedule, but I have been following. It's hard not to with the protests and the sitting in the street. And it's amazing. I think we're seeing a time in our country. Education, we're having to address, because I hate to say it, this institution. They thought, Jim Crow's gone, all that stuff. Let me tell you, at the core of this stuff is status quo. It is crazy. Well, first of all, let's just say that I went to a Catholic undergraduate as an undergraduate, but that does not mean that I'm a fan of taking money from schools and giving it to an arena at a Catholic school just because you might have a majority of Catholics in a city or location. Mayor Emanuel, that's what that means for. I do have to say, it's interesting. I've read so many articles on the CPS issue, and Gus, there's just so many angles I want to take it from, and I just want to really make sure I don't take too much time because I just am a little furious about it. Quite frankly, I think anger is a great thing. I think people try not to be angry. I hear some of my folks, I don't want to be angry. I'm like, no, anger is good. It helps change things. I mean, as long as it's not violent. And, there's, of course, situations where sometimes that's appropriate. But the thing about the CPS is we're going to put forth an African-American woman who's been appointed to the board. She's been appointed to the board. And we're going to have her speaking because, of course, there's African-American parents discussing the truth and tragedy that their children are walking across gang lines and prostitution alley and everything else. And we're going to have her get up there and say, well, we've got to fix our schools, and, we've just got too many schools for the numbers of students, which is still to be refuted, may I add. And it's one of those things where why does it always seem like we've got to have the magical minority popping up on the scene? And I want to not say UT here, but you know that I'm thinking it. And why do we have to have like Uncle Tom coming into the scene and trying to speak for all of us? That's just a question on the CPS thing. It's amazing because on the Harvard, have you heard what's going on at Harvard JFK School of Government?
Can you give us some information about it?
Well, similar thing. So there was a racist Scientology dissertation published, which of course is, that sort of, that was still used against some people have questioned, where there's the myth of white supremacy that, just innately they're genetically, smarter than we are and, better. Right? Well, this time it was used against Latinos. And at the JFK School of Government, as if JFK might have liked this himself, a panel of professors allowed a racist dissertation to be published saying that Latino immigrants were not as gifted, naturally, and smart as white people were in the United States of America. I mean, it had nothing, of course, to the fact that, white people have designed the quotation mark qualifiers for what smart means, right? But it had just innately they were not smart. So anyways, it was published, and so at this point, there's probably like 2,500 plus Latino students at Harvard and other people coming on board who have sent in letters, just like this happening with me right now. People were writing and everything. And they sent letters to the dean of the program, who's a white man, and they said, why would you allow this racist, scientist or Scientology dissertation to be published? And the guy who published it actually had to step down from what was his job he had after Harvard at a conservative newspaper. Anyways, the dean's defending a good figure, and he's saying that the team, the group of people who were assembled, the dissertation faculty, the professors at Harvard JFK, were very amazing scholars and very smart, and he's defending them. And so he put up, of course, an immigrant, a Cuban, who actually, the professor actually, interesting enough, migrated here with his mother, basically almost like in an inner tube, but his mother, to the United States of America. But his life has been spent, don't ask, has been spent discussing that we should limit immigration, illegal immigration. And he migrated here, presumably illegal. So they put forward the magical minority sort of on that one to say, this was a sound dissertation. And that's basically his words were, it was a sound dissertation. He was defending the dissertation. And the man was insulting him. And he dedicated his life to going against people who migrate here like he did. And so in CPS, we had that going on. We had, someone at the helm who's African-American who looks like has a similar skin color to us. And she gets up and discusses we need to fix our schools. Because why can't, we have Rom saying that by himself or just another white person by themselves. People who are truly on the board of like in Philly and D.C. where this is also happening. This is happening from Chicago to D.C. to Philly. Why can't we have the majority of like white boards and people who are really in control in city administration and government saying that these are their policies and their ideas? Why do we have to put forth the magical minority? And when we have parents who are speaking out, people who actually live the life saying, my child might get shot, and then we have on the same article white parents saying, well, if I was in that situation, I think about it differently. Shouldn't it be sort of evident that this is a problem? I think people know it's a problem. I just think they don't care because the life of an African American and a person of color is obviously not valued to that as a white American.
Wow. That is fascinating. I was talking with Pam. She's been a guest on the program repeatedly. She lives in Chicago. She has written about racism, white supremacy extensively, and we were talking about the school situation. And I was saying I want to try to get some more individuals on because, I mean, that's such an important situation that's going down. And just what you illustrated, like I was totally ignorant about all of that. There's report coming out and all of it. But just to hear that both of these situations where you have a lot of people who are saying, hey, there seems to be some racism here, where non-white people are being mistreated and or it's being suggested that there's something defective about non-white people. Both times it ends up being a non-white person who's at the focal point asking questions and accepting culpability for what's going on. And I just think it's a standard tactic, when you get frustrated and we already, what's going to happen. No good Uncle Tom's and and all this other stuff. Meanwhile, the system of white supremacy, no one is accusing white people of anything. No one is pointing at any white people and calling them names or blaming them. It's all the attention ends up being focused on a non-white person victim of racism. I do not think that is by chance or coincidence. I see that happen on a regular basis. I think it's a skillful tactic, and I'm so thankful you were able to share that info. We had another person that called in. I know I don't want to make sure we're abusing your time. Do you have time for one more question?
Oh, I'm certainly going to go ahead, Gus.
Okay. The person that dialed in, thank you for your time, Mr. McNair. The person that dialed in 1314, Mr. Weiss, your line should be open, sir.
Yes. Good evening, Gus. Good evening, Mr. McNair. I was just calling to give you some support, man. I have credits on a doctorate degree, and I went through the same trouble that you had 20 years ago. And my career is in the toilet now from all of those white-identified black people that I used to work with. And the only thing I can tell you, the only thing I hope that you can do is that you can find an alternative path, because I've had to rebuild my entire life from scratch. Because they literally whiteballed me from my career in education. The system of racism, white supremacy, as, with the help of those, white-identified black people, those that you just discussed and mentioned so eloquently. And I know how it is when you talk about it causes your health to break down, because I'm on medication and I'm in therapy now trying to work through this mess. It's a nightmare. White man's heaven is a black man's hell. I was just curious to know. Yeah, I was just curious to know, have you thought about some alternatives to where you are now? Is there some place maybe you might transfer to and just kind of pick up and move forward? Or are you just kind of stuck in where you are? Well, I know how jazz programs are.
Most certainly. Of course, I'm not going to list the places, but there are people who have an interest in me with the research that I had mentioned before, with doing racial theory, and then from a performance aspect, like performance studies, with combining, quite frankly, this experience and then education, and showing the interrelatedness of the bigotry in the arts and education in our society, and how it's perpetrated through the arts and on stage, and then perpetrated through education, right? So there are people who are interested in me sort of being able to spend time honing that research information and doing, let's say, a dissertation possibly. That would be an option. So I do have the fallback plans. I want to touch on something that you said about help. It is very, very true with help. I was asked today in an interview to give an interview this morning. I worked with an interview, and I was asked in the interview any advice to give other younger African Americans. I said, first of all, one of my points of advice is it's more than just about you, right? So it's more than just about any of us in this picture. For me, I approach it that way. I mean, when I came in this, I saw the bigger picture than just this. I saw, this is just institutional, and then it came from there. Like, look at this. It's got to be happening all around, obviously. And then I'm hearing all these stories like you and everyone else, right, that this is happening. And I knew it was. With the help, one of the things I said to people is that we as African Americans, especially those of us in the position that we are, have got to keep helping forward. I'm in the gym constantly. I have the heart rate I'm very fortunate and blessed to have the heart rate of, my doctor said, an 18-year-old at age 25. But that's deliberate, because I know that this stress level is not good, and hypertension runs on another side of everything. And so from how I eat to even getting as much sleep as I can, and my dieting and exercise are at the helm, because this is an attack. When you're at an institution like this, it's an attack on more than just your thoughts and your career. It's an attack on your body. It's an attack on your existence. It's an attack. Martin Luther King Jr.'s heart, they said, was 55 years old when he died, or older when he died. His heart was like that age. Right. And so we have to just really, I think people call it period with duration we have to go through. We just got to try to keep our physical health. And I support you so much in therapy. It's important. We all need it. We all should get it. And I want to say to people of color, a lot of times in our community, therapy is seen as, it's sort of this horrible thing to go to. If you need therapy, you go get it. But pick your therapist wisely. And I hate to say it, I always pick a therapist of color. If I go see a therapist, I see a therapist of color. Because therapy has been designed by who has designed psychiatry, and what do they want to tell us to do? Comply with that institution. They want to say that we're crazy if we seek to, call out things which are blatant racism. So, and to be called, you're just a troubled black person. That's a label that's painted, and it's very coercively designed to choose therapists wisely. And I thank you for calling with that question.
Oh, I have one more thing to suggest. If you ever get a chance to get into another program, I found I studied jazz piano under a jazz piano master, a black man named Clarence Beasley. He's codified a system of music that teaches you how to read, how to listen, how to arrange, and that's because I'm a pianist and organist now, and it's
amazing.
Yeah. A completely codified system of how to study and learn music. And everybody that he's ever taught music to over the years has taken off. Most of them just about all of them are black students. I don't know any white students that he's ever had. But I'm talking about people that that struggled with learning the different songs and learning the different repertoire, just eating their stuff alive. I mean, stuff I'm doing now I couldn't do when I was in a music program a couple of years ago. Had to leave that because I ran out of money. But ever since I got with this guy, it's like my inner genius is kicking in.
Well, I think
a whole new room in my brain's opened up.
Well, I think part of that is him, but part of that is you, and you naturally have a genius brain and a gifted brain.
Thank you. But keep pushing, brother. Just keep pushing. That's the only thing we could do.
Thank you very much, and we've got to. Thank you so much.
Bless you.
Thank you for calling in, Mr. Weiss. Before we wrap things up, you touched exactly. It was a listener, Bruce Fine. She commented, number one, she said Jackie Robinson. I think Jackie Robinson died in his 50s at a very young age. I think as a result of the John Henryism, same thing I said earlier. I think that might have been what took Jackie Robinson away from us so soon. But she was asking, since you mentioned earlier about having migraines, do you do anything like meditation, or do you see a therapist, especially since you have the migraines that you were dealing with?
We started, the migraines thing is such a story, but it came on, as I said, originally as vertigo, and I thought, I'm having this vertigo because I was sort of dizzy, but they treated me with vertigo medicine, and I'm very weary of some vertigo medicine because of the side effects. But this one was pretty okay. But then we got MRI in, and the neurologist, who actually herself she's Chinese, but she was an opera singer, got her master's in voice and opera. Actually, my physician and my neurologist here. And she actually, Dr. Mark, actually went off to Johns Hopkins for her MD, and she got tired of opera too. So there are alternate paths. But in terms of treating the migraine, I've actually started doing yoga, but I've been doing meditation for a while. I have an ex, actually, whom I adore. He's one of my best friends. He's my best friend, and he's actually Jewish, but he was actually a musicologist and actually got tired of music and actually is now training at A&T, North Carolina, which is actually a historically black college. He's training there for social work. And he is a Buddhist, actually, even though he's Jewish by ethnicity. And over the last summer, I was back home, and I was, a little stressed out about performing and auditions and things like that. And so we started actually going through meditation. I told him, you're not converting me to anything. But he started me on breathing. And so what I've started doing now is a lot of breathing meditation. I have my what I call my chill room that I'm speaking to you from actually right now in my apartment. My second room is my chill room in my office. And so actually I have my floor here, my Indian rug, and I sit on it and I breathe. This is my room of solace when I can have it. We've been talking about things like this in here. But I found that starting beginner's yoga and actually breathing meditation has helped so much with migraines. A lot of times my migraines do, I admit, come on at times when I'm confronted with a lot of thoughts. Not right now, actually, but it is at a time in which I do feel suppressed as a person. They come on. Luckily, I only have one more year in this program, right? But I've noticed that a trigger has been whenever I feel a threat to who I am, whenever I'm in a situation that I feel like I'm being told not to communicate what I know is true, or being told not to say what is honest and forward. And honestly, I'll tell you, those are times in which migraines do come on. They come on with weather changes too, but I'll say that suppression and oppression definitely can help trigger them too.
Wow. Fascinating. I hope folks were paying attention to that, the importance of breathing. You said the yoga also has been beneficial, and how the migraines have come on at times when you have felt like you're being suppressed or oppressed, likely as a result of racism, white supremacy. That is, wow. Jackie Robinson, I'm reminded again, Jackie Robinson. Before we close things out, one of our listeners did want to know if you are familiar with any of the guests that we've had on the program who are professors there. Charles W. Mills, he's a black male. Eula Biss, white female. Or Cheryl Judy, she is a non-white female. Are you familiar with any of those folks?
I know I might become acquainted with them depending on if they're in the have any relation to sociology or ath in the next year, because I'm going to be actually, starting that graduate certificate. So I might become familiar with them, but I am not right now, because our program is so, on the graduate level, it's overly specialized, and you're just cramped into that's a big problem. You're cramped into one area. So that's how you get a bunch of people who say racist things in those races, because all they do is study how to sing. They don't care about who wrote it and why it was written. So I don't know about them because of that reason, because we're so cramped in.
Okay, right on. Just curious to know. You said your partner is so-called Jewish. Is he a white person?
Well, he's an ex. He's not my partner anymore. He's an ex, but he's my like one of my best friends.
Okay.
No, he's white. He's Jewish. He's white. Parents were born in Bavaria, actually, in Germany. One in Austria, one in Germany, and they were actually never religiously Jewish or really Jewish, because they were actually they were raised. The father was raised atheist because at that time the Holocaust was happening, and so they didn't want to be persecuted because of the Holocaust, and they moved here. And actually, he grew up in Alabama. He's an interesting person of Jewish ethnicity because he was raised in Alabama. Actually, so he'll tell you, he's like, I'm not that Jewish, but he is Jewish in the ethnic sense. If you trace it back, you shall say.
That's fascinating. And he's at A&T. That is fascinating. Wow.
And he's a Buddhist. Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
Very, very. Context.
We get along well, as you can tell.
Wow. Context of White Supremacy. Have learned a ton. Are you familiar with the program Breaking Bad? I know I included it in the email. Are you familiar with that program?
I am not familiar with that program. You'll have to please tell me about it, because I did not get to look at it throughout the email. So would you let me know?
Man, I don't watch television. This is like one of the few television programs that I have watched in the last 5 years.
Same here. I rarely watch TV. So.
Okay. And let's see, how can I think this program reveals oh my gosh, yeah, this will be beautiful. This will tell you a lot about why I was so interested in your story immediately. Breaking Bad. This story is about a white man. He's in his late 40s. He turns 50 during the program. He's a high school teacher. He was a really good chemistry student, scientist in college. he was going to, I guess, make a lot of money, but he ended up throwing all that away and just being, like a regular old high school teacher in New Mexico. And he gets cancer right when he's about to turn 50. Thinks he's going to die, and so he starts selling crystal meth so that he can make a lot of money, so that he can leave his family some money to, take care of themselves or what have you, and cover his medical bills and what have you in the process of him dying. So he starts selling crystal meth. He's a scientist, so he makes really pure crystal, like the purest, most potent product on the market, and it just follows his odyssey from high school teacher to meth seller, meth kingpin. He becomes it's like Scarface almost. He becomes the biggest meth seller in the universe, and he's using one of his former students as his henchman. And anyway, the whole point of all of this is that this program, in my view, is demonstrating what it means to be a white person, because his name is Walter White, right? So the main characters, the White family. And so you're just seeing this white person who's selling drugs, he's killing people, he poisons a 10-year-old, and the racism is front and center too, because mostly it's non-white people who are being harmed, even though you do see some white people, but it's mostly non-white people being harmed. Like, they kill a lot of Mexicans, they chop their head off and all this other craziness. But it's almost no black people. You don't even see a black person until the third season. And of course, the black person, in addition to being a drug seller, his front is he sells chicken. And so we have the fried chicken drug selling black guy, who they eventually kill, of course. So, I mean, you're just watching these white people doing all these criminal acts and breaking the law, getting away. For me, one of the big things is that all of the white people involved are doing, even the white people that look like they're trying to be innocent, even have white enforcement officers, they're breaking the law and doing also. I mean, it's just total system. The racism is evident, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Walt Whitman becomes a crucial aspect of this series. It comes up, like they bring out his book, Leaves of Grass. And the main character, his name is Walter White. And so you've already got, hey, Walt Whitman, Walter White. And so then they took some of his poems. The audio clip that was at the very beginning of the program, that was from Breaking Bad, where they read his poem, The Learned Astronomer. And they have even that, to have a moment in modern television, 2013, where they stop and have a recitation of 19th century poetry, like, whoa, where does that happen on television? That just makes it stand out even more. Like the fact that we're going to stop and devote 60 seconds of television time right now to read a poem from Walt Whitman. And then, as I said, the series is about to end. It's about to start up in, I think, like 2 months. And this is it. They're ending it. Last 8 episodes. It concluded the cliffhanger where they leave you hanging for 8 months. A white man on the toilet with a collection of Whitman's poetry. That's where they leave you at, where he figures out this mystery that his brother-in-law is this big kingpin that he's been chasing for 4 years, because it's signed, and this has come up before, where he had the initials WW, and he was trying to figure out who he was talking about, and he said, oh, it could be you, Walter White, and Walter White responds and says, oh, I think it's Walt Whitman, because he's a fan. He said, oh, yeah. So this comes back, and he remembers that moment while he has this book, he figures it all out. So, they're making Whitman an integral aspect, and the bow on all of this was, I was totally clueless. I've been saying the whole time that this program is super racist. It's like they could not make it any more blatant unless they hung a sign on it that said, this is white supremacy program. And like the white everything about it supports racism, white supremacy. I've been saying this for months, and I was totally clueless that I was ignoring. They've got a huge racist right in the middle that they keep referencing over and over and over and making a crucial aspect. So,
do you think it's satire? Do you think they're using? I haven't seen it. Do you think they're purposely doing it, showing the Walt Whitman and showing them being the white doing the drugs to show like the light on white privilege? Do you think that's what it is?
Absolutely not. They have a white supremacist prison gang killing where he goes and he pays these Nazis, and they've got swastikas and everything to go out and kill and it's again a lot of non-white people show up when it's time to start killing people. There's nothing, to me, if anything, it's showing you can be a white person, you can be a white nobody And immediately, you can get away with all kinds of stuff. Just because you're white, they will not suspect that you are. You can have the police in your house, in your family, and they won't look at you because you are white. They immediately pick up and think there's something crazy about this chicken man. I don't think there's his story in there. They're camped out in front of his chicken establishment and bugging his. Nobody is looking at Walter White. I mean, he's a chemistry teacher. They go to a meth lab crime scene. There are products stolen from his high school chemistry lab, and they still don't look at him and say, hey, maybe you're involved in this. Do you know how this stuff is being stolen from here and winding up at crime? They still are not looking. If anything, to me, it's glorifying white supremacy. It's the fact that this white man can do all of this, and he makes they really make a point that he's so smart, he can make the best quality product. Like, no one can compare with what he can do as a white scientist with his white lab coat. I mean, I don't see any satire in it at all. In fact, as 909 says, satire is dead. People are being serious when they're joking. And I say that all the time too.
You're right.
A lot of times when people are joking and giving the veneer that this is not serious, they're just messing around, that's when they're being the most serious. And I think that's exactly what's happening. This is one of the most popular programs on television.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've never heard of it, but I'm going to just ask around to my friend and be like, have you ever heard of Breaking Bad? I mean, I'm just going to do that because I have friends who watch TV. I always turn the news for CNN, and then from that I can only pull so much before I get disgusted, because they have the racist panels, and they have one black person, and then they have everybody else who's white talking about racism. And then that black person, of course, is not wanting to speak the truth because they're outnumbered and scared, or else they're being paid. So I can't watch too much of the CNN, and I obviously don't watch Fox. Although maybe I should watch Fox, at least the Blade racism comes out.
Right. Yeah, I totally understand. I try to just see what they're talking about on the case, because sometimes they, like Fox, they had Colin Powell was on Bill O'Reilly's program a couple months back. It was extraordinary. They talked about racism for Bill O'Reilly asked him to be on because Colin Powell had come out and said that he felt a lot of the white people in the Republican Party were racist, and that's why they were opposing President Obama. And Bill O'Reilly kind of wanted to call him on the carpet and like, what are you doing saying this? You're supposed to be a Republican, and then you make statements like that. And there were many beautiful moments of it for me. Not that I'm even cheerleading for Colin Powell or anybody else, but I mean, I thought he handled himself so well. Like, there was...
I actually love Colin Powell. He was an idol. Growing up, there were several idols, and Colin Powell definitely was at the top three. My mother actually adored Colin Powell, and so as a child, he was actually a model for me, because my father was there all the time. So actually, when he was, I saw this man with these glasses, and he was on the Oprah sometimes growing up, and my mother would be watching, and she would say, look at him. And so as a child, that's very impressionable. You sort of listen to this man and everything, and I've come to respect him quite a bit. Yeah.
Wow. Let me add, since we talked about, do you think it fits the pattern that we were talking about earlier when you touched on what happened with the school in Chicago, both incidents with the school system, and how Colin Powell was used with regards to reporting on the weapons of mass destruction?
Of course. Of course.
Wow.
And Miss Condoleezza too, although Condoleezza is more in line with perhaps someone like, I don't know, perhaps some of the African Americans in quotation mark administration at Northwestern who see things but don't see things, and hear things but don't hear things. That's what Condoleezza is. Condoleezza would let the bus run over you.
Wow.
From what I've heard from people who entertained, it's pretty common that she's, that's about sums it up.
Wow. Victim of racism, Condoleezza Rice. I see that same. In fact, that I think got brought up as a part of the dialogue when Colin Powell was on Mr. O'Reilly's program a couple months back. But there were so many great moments because Bill O'Reilly got upset with him about him accusing these white people of being racist. But then he came back at Colin Powell and said, I'm also upset with you because you voted for President Obama. You voted for him twice. You came out and publicly endorsed him in close elections. And so he was upset with him about that. And he said, well, you know, why are you supportive of President Obama? And he reads off this long list of all these facts about how unemployment has gone up for black people, and black people were hurt really bad by the home foreclosures, and all these statistics about how things have just been really, really bad for black people the last 4 years since President Obama's been in the White House. And Colin Powell says, okay, those things might be true. And he responds to it, but then he stops and he says, why are you asking me these questions of me as a black man? Why aren't you just saying, you know, Colin Powell, you're a Republican. Why is it that I'm only supposed to identify around black issues? Why is that? And Bill O'Reilly was kind of stuck for a minute, like, well, I mean, you are a black person, right? You're supposed to be concerned, right? He's supposed to be doing something for black people. And Colin, he just did a phenomenal job. Like, it was, I applauded. It was fantastic. It just skillfully using his words. He didn't get upset. He didn't let Bill O'Reilly like bait him and get him to just get really angry. Like, he stayed super calm. It's just like, nope. This is, you know, the evidence that I have, you know, this is what I said. These are some of the conclusions I've come to about how he has been effective. And I think we should give President Obama more time. And these are some of the reasons that I've concluded that I think a lot of these white people are racist. This is what it's based on. There's no evidence for the thing. I mean, he just did a spectacular, I played the whole sound clip, on the program. Mm-hmm. I would encourage folks to check it out. That's so interesting that you were a big fan of Colin Powell growing up. Wow.
Growing up, it was a big deal. My mother, Elise, my mother, she whenever he was on TV, I didn't know what it was about him. I mean, she's a woman, so I think my mother definitely, saw him to be a handsome man, which Colin Powell is a handsome man. And a certain stature. He has a presence that is not imposing, from what I can see, but a presence that still is very collected and like used to not being upset. I never could have seen him as a person who would fly off the handle necessarily. Even if his temperament right, he would still maintain a certain degree of diplomacy. And I, as a child, just seeing him on TV and walking up on and speaking up on Oprah, or making any type of formal announcement, it was very impressionable upon me that this was an attitude that was perhaps positive for the African American communities in some ways, and perhaps to other ways that it wasn't. But he was so impressionable upon me as a child. He was already, he was one of my idols. He and Morgan Freeman.
Wow, Morgan Freeman. What stood out about Morgan? I know you mentioned him earlier in him, I guess, doing the interview where he said he wasn't, I guess, going to compromise him. I was thinking when you said that, the first thing that popped in my mind was Driving Miss Daisy. Like,
right, true. But he made some. That's true fact. But what people don't know a lot about his story is, Morgan was blackballed. I mean, at the beginning of his career, he walked into an audition and was asked, this was, Oprah has little master classes on, this was a clip I was watching on certain, she has sometimes the stars that talk, and most of the time I don't watch stuff like that because, just me personally, maybe you're the same way, I don't want to watch people worth like $200 million talk about how hard their life has been.
Amen.
Right, but it was Morgan Freeman, he's African-American, he's older, so his life has probably been hard. Let me look at this. And, he was, discussing, the fact that when he was going up for auditions, that he was very observant of the visibility of the racism. And he went up for this one where they had a movie with 5 scientists, and all the scientists were white. And he said, and then there was the cook and the janitor, and where that's going, they're all African American. So he walked in, took the script, and the stage director. And it's funny, he didn't even remember who they were really, because he's older and he's gotten famous, and they probably did. But they asked him, what do you think? And he said, well, I see that you have, and this is totally something that I've pulled before, I see that you have 5 scientists, and they're all white. And then I see that the janitor and the cook and the garbage collector, they're all of color and all African American. So tell me, what do I think? And he said, and obviously I didn't get that job. And then he was, really pushed back, and the glory was one of his, breakthroughs and all that great stuff. But there's this sincerity, adamant sincerity, that it's not, being flash or showy. It's just sincerity of, I'm not helping other African American actors if I'm constantly playing the janitor. And I'm constantly playing, this stereotype, why can't I be the scientist, and if you look at the latest movie with he and Angela Bassett, which I do think, although it was racist, but not towards African Americans, I think it was racist towards Koreans. That movie, I just went to see the movie theater 3 weeks ago, about North Koreans taking over America. But, Morgan Freeman became the president. The president's taken off.
Oval Office is down, or
it's something down. Yeah. And Angela Bassett is the head of the Pentagon, and then Morgan Freeman is Secretary of State, and he actually becomes the president. Actually, he saves the day for the most. Then a white guy saves the day on the inside, I think, but Morgan is the one coaching the plan, and he fired some generals and all and things like that. But it was interesting seeing that and then thinking about what he was saying, And had he not done that, I wonder if he would have been playing Secretary of State in this film today, if Angela Bassett had been the head of the Pentagon in this film. He's been an idol of mine because of that, because Morgan also speaks out on things. I voted for Barack Obama, both times. My first time voting was when Barack Obama won. I shook Barack Obama's hand in my first time voting. Before he beat Hillary, he came to North Carolina, and I got to shake his hand out of 1,000 people. I made it to the front of standing in line for 7 hours, and he shook my hand after he spoke. Before Hillary came in the next week, I didn't get to see her. But I will say that Morgan Freeman made a very good point, and he said, America has not yet had its first black president. We have our first biracial president. And he said people see it as if we always look at Obama, and it's interesting. He goes, I know we have to one drop rule, but we forget that he was raised, quite explicitly by his white mother, who, as Morgan said, and it's so true, who was very white. She was from Kansas, middle class, white grandparents who raised him, So, he was, raised in Indonesia for quite a bit, and a lot of perks that African American, it's totally different. We're talking about black experience, because black is more than a skin color. It's a sociological, I should say color too. It's the timbre of society. And so he was basically saying that Barack Obama's timbre, sociologically, doesn't necessarily fit the timbre of, African Americans, like let's say, say Deval Patrick, who's the governor of Massachusetts. Now, he actually grew up in low-income housing on the south side of a single mother, and, through all sorts of things before he got into Harvard for his undergrad initiated. That was a black experience. That was, sadly, we have to say, a more black experience in this country. But we know black experience is not normally growing up in Indonesia and learning all these different languages and then being sent off to Occidental college. That's not really necessarily how it works. We'd like that to be, I think, but I hate to say that most of us don't necessarily have that experience. So.
Probably accurate. I want to see this ceremony where he talks about what happened with this audition with the scientists and all that. Actually, I was looking at his film biography for his career, which is quite extensive. He's done so much. A lot of it has touched on racism, but I am flabbergasted because Glory and Driving Miss Daisy, it looks like they came out the exact same weekend. That is astounding. I mean, wow. I think both of those films got nominated for Academy Awards. To have him front and center for both of these roles, which is actually pretty interesting, because I think in both of those cases, I think Driving Miss Daisy is, I'll leave that to the side, as he's a chauffeur in that one. But with Glory, I think Matthew Broderick, that was really Matthew Broderick's breakout role, the white general who's playing the commander of the 54th Massachusetts, and it was kind of really the same role. White people got to see a lot, I guess, December of 1989, of Morgan Freeman kind of being the second to a white woman and a white man, kind of chauffeuring them through and shepherding through Matthew Broderick when he was young, and they weren't quite sure if they were going to listen to him as a commander, and he was kind of almost was going to use your term, but I've heard it used before, quote unquote, the magic Negro, where you kind of go in and help the white person be all that they can be and achieve and be their best, and you're their willful second. Yeah, I think that it's pretty much kind of I had never even thought of how similar those two films are, much less that they came out the same weekend. That is astounding. Anywho.
Well, and sadly, as I said in the latest movie, he becomes the president. But it's sort of like, he's the hero in strategy, but the physical hero. Of course, I mean, there is, of course, just sort of common sense. I guess they wouldn't put an older man as the physical hero who's going in and punching the Korean builder. They could have put a person of color in there, but Morgan Freeman was obviously not in that role, but he was the facilitator of getting things done. But it's interesting because the hero of the day was beating up all the guys, was the best friend of the president who had been a bodyguard. So it's interesting to see the level of that, which he talks about not wanting to ever accept being demeaned as an African American. So I wonder if that means for him, if he's along the same lines that I've been with Walt Whitman, that if it's bringing visibility to the institution and what's happening, like if it's showing like this is what's occurring, and maybe it's promoting people to go, why is it always like that? Oh wait, this is part of real life. Maybe he's for acting that. But if it's for demeaning and keeping things that way, perhaps not. So, and there's a fine line between the two, because you might be bringing attention to it, but then again, are you continuing it by bringing attention to it? So.
That's a good point. In fact, for how thin that line can be, as a, I guess, kind of final point, the film, it's Olympus Has Fallen. I said Oval Office.
Olympus Has Fallen.
Olympus Has Fallen. The most recent one where he's the president. This is the second time, to my knowledge, that Mr. Freeman has been president in a film. He was also president in Deep Impact. Both of those films involve some sort of catastrophe that just happens to also have a black president, when the planet is going to be hit by an asteroid that could kill us all, and when we are invaded by terrorist slant-eyes from North Korea or South Korea or some Asian place where there's some yellow peril.
That was so racist.
I mean, it's just, they still find a way to weave it in there. Regardless whether you're the butler or the president, we're still going to weave the racism in there. Just be on the lookout for it.
And then the Koreans and Olympus Has Fallen. I mean, I was black, and I was sitting there actually as a black man, just angry because of the way they treated. I was like, wow, they were showcasing the Koreans as barbarians. Actually, that was the crazy part. It was really interesting. If you watch that movie,
I have.
What you would consider, how you consider an African American being portrayed as barbarian in the movie. That is how the Koreans were portrayed in the movie. They portrayed them as barbaric, and they're speaking a different language, and she was saying speak English, and it's just awful.
That was concurrent with the time that white people were at least reporting that they were very upset with North Korea and the president. So they had the film.
What a coincidence!
Exactly. And that was the second such film like that, Red Dawn. They did a remake of that, which originally came out in '84 with, I think, Charlie Sheen and some other white people when they were not even stars yet. But they did a remake of it, and it's pretty much the same thing. And in fact, they invade Seattle in this film, which came out for Thanksgiving in 2012. But it's the same thing. Slant-eyed yellow peril coming in to do us harm. Got to be prepared. It has been a hoot. I have learned a ton. I hope listeners learned something as well. Oh man, that's kind of embarrassing. I'm also I'm a little embarrassed to even ask this. One of our guests asked if you could give us a tune before exiting. I'm a little embarrassed to even ask such a thing, but
well, would you say, well, I would say send them to the WGN article of me singing. Well, if you would actually, if they want to hear a clip of me singing, because the problem is that we're on the phone, and if they can probably already tell my voice is pretty boomy. If I start singing into this phone, it's going to just, you won't get the voice. Like, you're just going to hear it popping and buzzing and the phone vibrating. So if they want to type in Timothy McNair bass into YouTube, they can pull up a clip that actually WGN put on the article of me performing in Bavaria last summer. I was actually performing in Bavaria, and they can actually pull up that clip of me singing if they'd like to hear me, what I sounded like, and my voice is changing for slightly since last summer, but if they'd like to hear that, for sure. I would sing, but over the phone is much different than on a camera.
Duly noted. Right on. In fact, I will. I have the audio clip. I was going to put it in the introduction for the program, but
great. Okay.
I thought it'd be best to play the news clip so they could hear what happened, and then the sequence of Breaking Bad. So I will include the audio of you singing. So that'll be the conclusion. Folks will get to hear him test out the vocals and hear the talent that he is being barred from sharing up at Northwestern University in his one course right now. Mr. McNair, thank you so much for sharing some of your time and insight. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. I think a lot of listeners have as well. I wish you success. I hope things work out. I hope you get your well-earned A in the course and never have to see Dr. Nally again in life. You can get your master's degree and proceed and do all sorts of wonderful things and work against racism all the while. We will definitely be keeping our eye out to see what happens, and if we can be of service, please let us know. I want to make sure people get the word out and know what's going down there.
Thank you, Gus. In solidarity, my friend. In solidarity.
Take care, sir. We enjoyed it. We will be in touch soon. Again, Mr. Timothy McNair joining us live from Evanston, Illinois. Thank you kindly and enjoy your evening.
Good night. Take
care, sir. Context of White Supremacy. Fascinating. Fascinating. I will include the audio of the song. Have that included, so that'll be at the very end. We'll do the prayer and all that, and then you'll hear the song. So you can just get the download. It'll be on there, and the audio should be pretty high quality, so you'll be able to hear his vocals at their best. Yes, Morgan Freeman was also God. I forgot which movie that was. I think Chris Rock was in it too. Oh, I just had his thing pulled up. I'll pull that back up. Oh, I wanted to get in as well. They mentioned that Martin Luther King Jr., that he had the heart of a 55-year-old. The report that I pulled up, this is at Mail Online, the Daily Mail Online, UK site. They had this article published earlier this year, the day that the anniversary of the assassination from April 4th, 1968. They published that King was 39 years old at the time of his death, but an autopsy revealed that his heart had been strained so much that it looked like that of a 60-year-old. Not 50s, 60-year-old. That is the damage of racism, white supremacy, and that would be Exhibit 9,825 about why we should really make an effort to refrain, minimize publicly picking on, criticizing, fault finding with other black people. We don't have to agree, but not going to be out bashing other black people while we are still under racism, white supremacy. Thought you got a great demonstration of that on the program, because I think when Mr. McNair responded about Langston Hughes, and Langston Hughes thinking, or at least writing, that he thought Walt Whitman was great. I don't really think he bashed Langston Hughes and said that he was stupid or dumb or anything like that. I don't think he called him any names, what have you, and I think we can be the same way. That is a victim of racism, white supremacy, VGQ. They can say or take whatever position that they take on racism, white supremacy, counter-racism. That's their view. This is my view. This is what I think. And just keep it pushing. That's a big way, something small that can have a big impact in minimizing, reducing conflict between victims of racism, and no name calling. The guest, his name, if you all want to search, Timothy McNair. Nothing tricky. Timothy, Timothy, McNair, McNair. Timothy McNair. Should pop up on YouTube. As I said, I will include the audio at the end of the broadcast. I think we have done our 3 hours. Hopefully constructive. It was definitely interesting for me. I already pulled the link to send him the report of Dr. McGriff, the doctor in North Carolina who got fired. They called him uppity. He got fired after NPR did the story on him a couple weeks ago. I'm going to send Mr. McNair the audio segment of Dr. McGriff, I think that would be interesting since he grew up in the North Carolina area. Anywho, we will be back a little bit later in the program. If nothing else, I would encourage folks, pay attention to the news, even if they are saying things that are not true, which they most definitely do. You kind of have to watch to see what they're lying about. That way you can at least pick out, oh, this is the stuff that they're not being truthful about. This is the stuff where they've only given you half of the information, so on and so forth. If they're just being anti-black or practicing racism, white supremacy, and other means, got to be paying attention so that you can catch that, pick it out, and then help other non-white people also be in the know about what's going on. At least that's the position I've taken. We will be back. Just check either you can check the Black Talk Radio page for the updates. The Facebook page, we're on Facebook, facebook.com/The Problem is White People. Updates are there, as well as the Black Talk Radio Network page. You can join us on Twitter at Until Justice. On Twitter again at Until Justice. The podcasts, you can download them via iTunes. We are also on Stitcher. If you go to Stitcher, just download the app. It is free. You have an iPhone, smartphone, mobile device, whatever. Download the app, Stitcher.com. It is free. Once you do that, you can just search for, you can put in racism, white supremacy. We should pop up. You'll see the black and white cows logo, and boop, you can stream it, you can download it, be able to access it with your mobile device. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into the broadcast. We will be back definitely before Friday. The book study session, last one, Chinua Achebe, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific this Friday evening. Final book study session. Want to remind listeners, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, she will be in St. Louis. She will be giving a lecture this coming Saturday. The information, you can contact Mr. Greg Harris at 314-877-9252. You can also contact Mr. James Stewart, 618-977-8191. Stewart, 618-977-8191. Mr. Harris, 314-877-9252. It'll be this Saturday, June 8th. There's a meet and greet from 12 p.m. noon to 1:30 p.m. And the actual program, the doors open at 3 p.m. and it starts at 3:30 p.m. Saturday afternoon. If you are in the St. Louis area, get out, support. $15 donation for advance tickets. Definitely support the work of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. If you are in the area, go see her. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the broadcast. We will wrap up with our brief prayer. It has been time. Creator, we ask, please aid us in realizing the value of self-respect. The words of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, self-respect is more powerful than a nuclear weapon. Help us understand the importance of that sentence and manifest our understanding of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing in our thought, speech, and action on a regular, constant basis. It has been time. Context of White Supremacy signing out. Thank you all for tuning in.